Chapter 1, the year after the quiet ending. A year after the sky cracked open, after the goo melted like dirty snow and the flowers fell from nuns like soft confessions, life had settled into something almost normal, which in this town meant only 3 or 4 small impossibilities per week. Gumbo, now well into his 80s and still built like an old oak tree that had survived lightning more than once, spent mornings pruning bonsai while arguing with invisible radio commentators only he could hear. Dorothea, 20 years younger and still carrying that ex-nun calm like a loaded weapon. Ran logistics for half the property, including making sure Chaos, now taller, sharper, and more unpredictable, didn't accidentally bend gravity when he sneezed. They had survived mirror prophets, singing gelatin life forms, rogue museum scandals, secret societies that met in castles, kidney stones that talked like tired philosophers, and at least 3 events that might have been the apocalypse or just Tuesday. Nobody ever fully agreed which. Clotilde ran the call center like a general running a war from a folding chair, headset crooked, rosary wrapped around her wrist like backup ammunition. Cato and Sean lived above the music store down from the malt shop, their relationship still cycling between cosmic romance and emotional demolition derby. Jermaine drifted between odd jobs and spiritual crises. Loon and Merrick worked nights at the museum under Professor Voss, who still believed, stubbornly and sweetly, that knowledge could save people. Brigsby lurked in the margins of everything like a mildew stain on history. Ralph the parrot remained the loudest creature on earth. Conception still shimmered in reflection sometimes. Scott still hummed inside the secret mirror room like a broken refrigerator of prophecy. On Tuesday, all of that background...
Chapter 3, the moose that knew too much. The fallout didn't arrive like thunder. Seeped in like humidity, slow, heavy, impossible to escape. By morning, the museum parking lot was wrapped in yellow tape that fluttered like nervous prayer flags. The smell of burnt circuitry and pretzels from the snack kiosk hung in the air, mixing with something metallic and wrong. Inside, the magical talisman pulsed faintly from where Cato had hidden it inside a hollow brick in the maintenance wall behind the diorama hall. The brick wall itself hummed now, like it remembered being something else before it was mortar and dust. Cato swore if you leaned close enough you could hear Whispering Bone whispering. Gumbo had once said bones liked to talk if you gave them wind. And at the convent long ago, the walls had been thick enough to keep secrets and bodies at the same time. Nobody talked about what happened there. Not out loud. Not even when the Vatican investigators came and left with their careful shoes and careful lies. But bones don't forget, was how Gumbo used to make his wind chimes. Sean didn't say anything as they drove to Galveston. The Gulf shimmered like melted aluminum. The car smelled faintly of scentsy vanilla cinnamon wax melts and fast food manwich from the night before. They hadn't told anyone yet. Technically, they weren't supposed to be married. Courthouse ceremony had taken 7 minutes and felt like stepping into a secret pocket of time. The rings sat light on their fingers. The silence between them was warm and full and private, like a shared dream neither wanted to wake from. Okra gumbo burbled in a slow cooker in the back seat, sealed tight in Tupperware because Cato insisted road trip food needed emotional gravity. They passed the cruise ship dock's first floating cities resting like patient giants. Then the peanut butter factory, which smelled like roasted childhood and salt air. Then the witchery squeezed between 2 pastel storefronts. Its window display showing trend mode hair flat irons arranged around a ceramic chamber pot draped in red curtains and blue bell-bottoms. Sean laughed. Feels illegal somehow. Inside the shop window sat a mannequin torso wearing a vintage bra. The tag read 1987 reproduction Roseanne era styling. The plastic skin tone was deep caramel. The dark brown areola detail was weirdly realistic in a way that made both of them look away at the same time. Outside at an intersection, a chubby red-headed man waved at traffic holding a cardboard sign. When their car stopped at the light, he leaned toward the window. "You got that glow," he said. "Like people who know something other people don't." Cato handed him $5 and a bag of pretzels. Big Red saluted them with exaggerated seriousness. "Watch the moose," he said. Then he walked away before they could respond. Back at the museum, the telepathic plant had started vibrating. It sat in a recycled trash bin in the staff office, roots coiled through old newspapers, discarded feminine napkins, and broken laser security sensor parts. Pulsed in colors that shouldn't exist. Maribel the intern pressed her temples. "Spelling," she whispered.
On the whiteboard she wrote.
"Learning language structure. Hooked on phonics, but botanical." The plant pulsed faster. Across the hall, the laser-protected perimeter around the artifact's vault flickered. For a split second, the beam's laser beams, as the maintenance guy called them, bent inward like gravity had hiccuped. The moose display eyes lit up. The near-fatal part happened fast. A tool group stood too close when the ceiling support cracked one of the old beams, weakened by water damage and decades of vibration. The entire moose diorama shifted forward. The talisman inside the brick wall screamed no sound, just pressure inside skulls. The telepathic plant exploded into light. And the moose taxidermy, dead for decades, stuffed with sawdust and history, moved. Not alive. The analyst caught the falling beam mid-collapse, redirecting it just enough. Someone else fainted. When the dust cleared, the moose stood tilted, heroic and terrible, one glass eye cracked but glowing faint gold. Inside his chest cavity, behind the stitching nobody ever noticed. Second talisman. A blood-stained, nun-habit fragment embroidered with Guatemalan thread patterns and Vatican inventory codes, burned into the fabric. That night, Cato and Sean sat on the seawall eating gas station ice cream and watching the moon phases climb out of the Gulf horizon. "Message from unknown number." Sean exhaled slowly. "He uses it when he wants me to know he's watching but doesn't want proof." "You should ask about the bones." Maury was right about secrets. The final message came with an image attachment, a photo of the convent wall. Hundreds of miles away, Brigsby stood in a candlelit room lined with Etsy shipping boxes and Vatican archive crates. Hushed the second phone to his ear. "Moving faster than expected," he said. The museum incident was useful. Behind him, hanging from a rack, rows of restored nun habits, one still stained dark at the chest. On the seawall, the wind shifted. The moose emoji blinked again on Sean's phone, and the talisman inside Cato's pocket started getting warm. Chapter 4, The Talisman in the Quiet Town. The talisman did not glow the way stories say magical objects glow, holding a heartbeat that didn't belong to any living thing. Chaos felt it first, even before the car door slammed behind them. A deep, low vibration humming through bone and teeth, like standing too close to massive speakers at a concert. Anae felt it next, not in her hands, but in her throat, like words she couldn't quite speak. Brigsby stood across the sand lot in a three-piece suit that didn't belong in West Texas wind. The jacket flapped open, revealing restraints hanging casually from his belt-like tools. His patent leather boots were dusted with pale sand, polished enough to reflect the sky. "Magic's funny," he said almost kindly. "Works best when you don't understand it. Stops working when you think you're in control." Behind him stretched the town, if it could be called that. One shutter grocery. One brick wall running longer than it should have, like it had been built to hide something instead of hold something up. Chaos flicks his fingers. Just skin and bone. Anna tested the air the way she usually did, reaching out with that strange second-sense awareness she'd trained since childhood. Even the telepathic plant tucked into her coat lining felt muted, like it had been put to sleep. "Town's built on something old," he said. "Older than your tricks. Older than mine, too, if I'm honest." He stepped closer and clipped a heavy dog collar around Chaos's neck, not tight, not choking. "Just enough to say you're not in control here." Chaos didn't react outwardly, but inside he cataloged everything. the way Brigsby favored his left ankle. Information was power when power itself was gone. Marched toward the brick wall. Up close it was a normal brick. Some looked almost burned, like singed hair had once brushed across them and left history behind. Be amazed what people build over when they want to forget. Inside the structure, the air smelled faintly of okra gumbo, dust, and something medical antiseptic in old paper. Chaos noticed details automatically. A stack of boxes labeled Manwich near a rusted sink. Pretzel crumbs ground into concrete. A trash bin overflowing with things no one wanted to think about, discarded feminine napkins, yellowed newspapers, broken Scentsy warmers, Etsy shipping envelopes that had never been opened. Human life paused mid-sentence. They were secured to metal chairs, not brutally. Restraints looked clean and tight. "Gumbo's doctor called," he said casually. Harder than anything physical could have. Held up the talisman. Up close it looked almost cheap, like costume jewelry from a church play. But the air around it bent slightly like heat waves off asphalt. "You know why none of your powers work? Because this doesn't stop magic. Decides what magic is allowed to exist." Silence swallowed the room. Outside, wind scraped sand against brick. Time felt stretched thin, and that was when Chaos and Ana finally moved. Chaos dislocated his thumb. Pain fled white-hot, but the restraint loosened just enough. Ana used a shard of something, maybe broken patent leather from an old Mary Jane shoe, to saw at the strap binding her wrist. Outside wind picked up harder. Somewhere far off, a radio crackled, someone playing songs from Annie. The sound drifted and warped and slow, like memory underwater. Chaos finally slipped one hand free. Annie dropped to the floor beside him, breath shaking but steady. Still powerless. Still trapped in a town that ate magic. Still wearing the marks of being handled like objects. But they were not finished. They reached the back exit and pushed it open just enough to see the sand dunes rolling out under moonlight. If they could cross open ground with Brigsby somewhere nearby. If they could survive without the powers that had always saved them before. Yet the talisman didn't reach farther than they thought. Chaos squeezed Anae's hand once. Then they stepped into the night, knowing the escape would either save them or make sure no one ever heard from them again.
Chapter 5, Dirt, Silence, and the Worst Picnic in History. Chaos woke up certain of 3 things. He was buried alive. Something smelled unforgivably bad. Anne was humming angrily somewhere to his left. He tried to move his arms. Packed soil pressed in on his chest like the world's rudest weighted blanket. "Please tell me you're alive," he croaked. "I am," Ana said, her small voice tight with irritation. "But I am also filthy, and I hate being filthy." Chaos managed a weak laugh that turned into a cough. Dirt fell into his mouth. He spat and tasted something metallic and sweet. "Is that soda?" There was a faint metallic clink as his fingers brushed aluminum. "A canned Coke," he whispered in disbelief. "Of course, naturally. Because why wouldn't there be soda in my grave?" Anne shifted beside him, soil sliding. In the cramped darkness, Chaos could feel the warmth of her small body. She was barely the size of a large dog, more pony-shaped than horse-shaped, but usually shimmered faintly with magic. Right now, there was nothing. No glow, no warmth of power. Just fur, breath, and tension. "My magic isn't working," she said quietly.
Yeah.
"Mine either." That landed like a stone between them. Chaos tried to reach for the familiar hum inside his chest, the place where energy usually pooled, waiting to be shaped. Nothing answered. Just the slow thud of his heart and the crushing weight of dirt. "Brigsby did this," Chaos said. "Yes," Anne replied. "And I will bite him, repeatedly, when we are not underground." Chaos shifted again and felt something slick against his sleeve. He froze. "I don't want to know what that is." The smell confirmed it before logic could. Urine. Old, sour human waste. Whoever Brigsby had buried them with, or near, had not had a dignified end. Worst picnic ever, Chaos muttered. Anna snorted, which somehow sprayed more dirt onto his face. "Gus," she said. "We need air." Chaos forced himself to think. Panic was a luxury for people who weren't currently part of the landscaping. He shifted his hand again and found something plastic, crinkly. He pulled. A pink trash bag tore open slightly, releasing a burst of stale, fruity rot. Something cylindrical rolled out and bumped his wrist. "Bottle of cranberry sauce," he said, baffled. "Why would someone bottle cranberry sauce?" And I asked.
"I don't know."
"Maybe they hate Thanksgiving." He twisted his shoulders, forcing a pocket of space open. His elbow struck something solid and wrapped in paper. He pulled it close, squinting in the dark, like that would help. "Please be food," he whispered. The wrapper crinkled. 7-layer burrito. Then Anna said, "I would like to die again." Chaos laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. "Look at the bright side," he said. "If we suffocate, at least we won't be hungry." A faint sound filtered through the dirt above them, scratching. Then a muffled bark. Chaos froze. "No way," he whispered. The scratching got faster. Dirt shifted. A small cascade of soil fell across his chest. Then a tiny nose burst through. Dirt sprayed everywhere. A pit bull puppy, coated head to toe in mud, shoved its face into the hole and sneezed directly into Chaos's eyes. Chaos started laughing so hard he nearly passed out. "You," he wheezed, "are the best hallucination I have ever had." The puppy barked again, tail thumping somewhere above ground. More dirt collapsed inward. Light trio, beautiful sun-warmed light spilled down in thin beams. But something else came with it. A smell like crushed leaves and sweet rot. And whispers. Chaos went still. Through the widening hole, he could see roots. Thick ones, twisting like knuckles. And on those roots, plant faces, eyes closed, lips moving silently. Anne sucked in a breath. "They're the ones..." The plant faces began to murmur not words, exactly, but intention, pressure, direction. The puppy dug harder, guided by something unseen. The soil loosened around Chaos's shoulders. He shoved upward. Dirt tore away. Fresh air hit his lungs like lightning. They clawed their way out together, Chaos first. Then Anna, small and shaking, her coat streaked with mud and something darker. They collapsed beside a shallow pit lined with roots and slick clay. Nearby sat a dented bucket of rainwater. Chaos dunked his face in without hesitation. When he came up, sputtering, he saw it. An owl sat on a crooked branch above them, watching with enormous, patient eyes. Not just watching, judging.
"Thank you," Chaos said hoarsely.
The owl blinked once, then launched silently into the trees. Chaos rolled onto his back, staring at the sky. Clouds moved slow and heavy overhead, like nothing strange had happened at all. Anne lay beside him, breathing hard. "Magic is still gone," she said. "Yours?" "Gone." They lay there for a long moment. Then Chaos sat up sharply. "Brigsby." Across the clearing, footprints led into dense brush. "Fresh." "He ran," Chaos said. "Yes," Anai said quietly. "But he left us alive." Chaos stared at the plant roots near the pit. One of the faces barely visible now seemed to twitch. A warning. He swallowed. We don't tell anyone about this, he said. And I nodded slowly. No one would believe us. Not that, Chaos said. He watched the trees, every shadow suddenly suspicious. I think someone does know. And, I think they want it quiet. The puppy barked once, sharp and nervous. Wind moved through the clearing. The plant faces were already sinking back into stillness. And somewhere, far away, Brigsby was still breathing. Chaos stood slowly, joints screaming, body filthy, mind racing. Come on, he said. Let's get somewhere that doesn't smell like a haunted bathroom. Anais stood beside him, small, muddy, powerless, and alive. They walked toward the tree line. Behind them, the dirt settled, and deep below, the roots whispered secrets to the bones. Chapter 5, The Soil That Watches. The ground above Chaos and Anna was heavy, damp, and smelled like old roots and rusted pennies. Dirt pressed against Chaos's ears until every heartbeat sounded like someone knocking from inside his skull. Anna, small and trembling beside him in the cramped underground pocket Brigsby had left them in, snorted softly, her magic flickering like a dying flashlight. Whatever Field Brigsby had dragged them into some forgotten patch of Texas land where the sky always looked slightly bruised was, swallowing power like a sponge. Chaos tried anyway.
Nothing.
Not even a spark. Somewhere above them, wind scraped across scrub brush and distant highway noise hummed like a tired refrigerator. Chaos swallowed mouthfuls of dirt taste and said, "We are not dying in a hole because that creep thinks he's smarter than us." Anais nudged his shoulder and let out a shaky whinny that almost sounded like agreement. Above ground, something unexpected was already moving. The little faceplants had followed, not in a fast, dramatic, horror movie way, in a slow, persistent, unsettling way. Tiny stems pushing through soil, small green faces blinking awake in the moonlight. One plant near the burial site frowned deeply, like it was concentrating very hard.
Pitbull puppy tied to a mailbox started barking hysterically at nothing visible.
At the burial site, the dirt shifted. Chaos felt at first tiny trickles of loosened soil falling against his cheek. "Something's happening," he whispered. An eye kicked weakly, not panic. Instinct. Above them, dozens of faceplants strained toward the buried pocket like paramedics who had never been trained, but showed up anyway. Their roots threaded through soil, loosening it. Not digging. Persuading. Dirt began collapsing inward in soft, crumbly cascades. Chaos clawed upward. Anais pushed with her small but stubborn body. Dirt filled Chaos's mouth, his nose, his shirt collar. The smell of wet earth mixed with something sharp urine, maybe, old fertilizer, maybe, something human and neglected. Above ground, an owl watched from a dead tree branch, head rotating slowly like it was keeping score. The dirt ceiling gave. Cold night air rushed in like salvation. Chaos pulled himself out first, then dragged Anai free. Both of them lay in grass, gasping, coated in mud and shaking. Nearby sat a pink trash bag caught on barbed wire, fluttering like a cheap ghost. A bucket of rainwater reflected a warped moon. A half-crushed canned Coke glinted beside an empty bottle of cranberry soda. Someone had dumped a Taco Bell bag nearby, a smashed 7-layer burrito, bled beans and sour cream into the dirt like a tragic mural. Chaos rolled onto his back. "I hate this town sometimes," he said. Anais snorted in agreement and sneezed mud. The pitbull puppy, now loose, came barreling toward them like a furry missile and immediately began licking Chaos's face like he was made of peanut butter. Chaos laughed despite everything. The kind of laugh that comes from something you were absolutely not supposed to survive. Then the plants did something new. They turned their faces toward Chaos. All of them, dozens, maybe hundreds, watching. Not scary, not friendly, just attentive. Chaos sat up slowly. Okay. That's new, he said. In the distance, Brigsby's truck engine roared to life. Headlights swept across the field once, searching, then peeled away toward the highway. He was gone now. Chaos stood, shaky but alive, and rested his forehead against Anai's muddy mane. "We're getting home," he said. Anai stamped once, determined. On the walk back toward the highway, they passed a rusted sign pointing toward an old refugee aid route once used decades ago for shipments tied loosely to Sudan Relief Supply, lines half erased, sun-bleached history. Chaos barely noticed. He was too busy being alive. At the edge of the field, they found an abandoned shack. Inside, a cracked sink, a pile of old blankets, and a mildewed Afghan draped over a broken chair. Chaos wrapped it around his shoulders anyway. They sat there for a long minute, catching breath, listening to wind whistle through broken boards. Then Chaos said quietly, "I need to say something out loud before I lose my nerve." He stared at the floor. And then he spoke in one long rush. "I keep thinking about how power isn't lightning bolts or glowing eyes or any of that comic book garbage. It's surviving stuff that should have ended you. It's remembering who you are when someone tries to bury you literally or otherwise end. I think maybe these plants aren't here to hurt us. Maybe they're here because they're scared too. And maybe the universe is just a big messy place where even magic needs help sometimes. And if I ever get out of this alive, which I guess I just did him gonna stop acting like I have to be strong all the time. Because even Anae gets scared, and she's literally magic. And maybe being alive is already the miracle, and everything else is just extra." Silence sat in the shack after that. Then the puppy barked once, like applause. Outside, the faceplants along the dirt road all slowly closed their eyes, like they had just witnessed something sacred. Why, sirens wailed towards some unrelated emergency. And in the dark space under the convent, inside the hidden wall cavity, where bones no one talked about rested tangled together, something shifted. Not violently, not loudly. Just enough to make dust fall like gray snow. And somewhere deep in the town, a single faceplant opened its mouth for the first time and tried unsuccessfully to form a word. They came home in the passenger seat of a semi-truck that looked like it had survived 3 divorces, 2 small wars, and at least 1 incident involving illegal fireworks and a waffle iron. The driver had 3 arms, not metaphorically.
Not in a wow he multitasks way.
3 actual arms, each sunburned, freckled, and tattooed with faded nautical stars and what might have once been a mermaid but now looked like a potato with hair. His name was Dale, and he smelled like diesel fuel, peppermint gum, and stubborn kindness. Chaos sat slumped against the window, still caked in dirt. Anae curled across his lap, exhausted, her small magical horse ears drooping like wet paper. Dale steered with one hand, shifted gears with another, and occasionally handed Chaos pretzels with the third. "Y'all picked a bad day to get buried," Dale said conversationally. "Moan does weird stuff to soil density." Chaos blinked slowly. "That is not how dirt works." Dale shrugged. Tell that to dirt. They roll past fields, gas stations, telephone poles, humming with invisible electricity. Chaos watched the sky, feeling the faintest whisper of his power returning, like static after a storm. By the time the convent came into white walls glowing gold in late afternoon sun, his chest felt warmer, not strong, but not empty anymore. Dorothea was waiting at the gate. She ran, full sprint, bare feet slapping gravel. When she reached Chaos, she grabbed his face, then pulled him into a hug so tight his ribs popped. "You smell like death," she said into his shoulder.
Accurate, he said.
Gumbo stood behind her, leaning heavier than usual on his cane. His smile was wide but tired around the edges. The last few weeks had carved new lines into his face. The health scare, whatever the doctors had found, and then, unfound still, hovered over him like a storm cloud, pretending to be decorative. He hugged Chaos. "Anyway, you scared me, boy," he said softly. Chaos swallowed hard. "I'm okay." Gumbo nodded, but didn't look convinced. Nearby, Cato stood with Sean, arms folded, eyes shining with relief she was trying very hard to hide. Germaine leaned against the porch rail, jittery, too alert, eyes darting like birds. Chaos clocked it instantly. The tremor in Germaine's fingers, the hollow hunger in his eyes. An old, familiar ghost whispering crack cocaine back into his bloodstream. Chaos said nothing. Not yet. Dorothea clapped her hands suddenly. "Okay?" she said too brightly. "Emergency change of plans. We're combining your birthday party with a welcome home celebration because emotionally I cannot survive another event this month." Chaos blinked. "It's my birthday?" Gumbo coughed. "Technically it was yesterday. I was buried yesterday. Still counts," Dorothea said firmly. The party started soft. Streamers, cake, paper plates. Someone had put on Madonna 1 of the old dance track San Cato, who had been obsessing over Madonna for months like she was studying for a spiritual exam, immediately started explaining the historical importance of every synth line to anyone trapped within 6 feet of her. Sean nodded politely while eating cake like a hostage. Clotilde organized drinks with military precision. Loon and Merrick hung lights across the bonsai garden. For a moment just, a fragile, shimmering moment life felt normal. Then the bones woke up. It started with a sound inside the walls. Not a bang. Not a crack. A rattle, like wind chimes. Gumbo froze. Chaos saw it immediately. The look in his father's eyes. The secret nobody talked about. The bones inside the convent walls. The ones from long ago. The ones Gumbo had once quietly, privately used to make wind chimes when he thought they were just old relics. Another rattle. Then the plaster cracked and bones burst out. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Yellowed, polished, some still tied together with old rosary strings. They shot through the air like panicked birds. Someone screamed, smashed into a table. A rib sliced through a banner. Skull ricocheted off a cabinet and shattered a punch bowl. A small fire sparked when a bone hit a hot plate. Mames licked up a curtain before Clotilde smothered it with a tablecloth, but not before smoke filled the kitchen and someone inhaled enough to drop coughing to the floor. Harrowing, fast, chaotic. Dorothea slipped and hit her shoulder. Sean took a rib to the forehead. Loon dove behind a counter as a spine clattered across tile like throne chain. Chaos stood in the center of it, its heart pounding. Magic, flickering back like a dying fluorescent bulb. Not Now, he whispered. Another skull flew toward Anna. Chaos snapped. Power flooded back, not full strength, but enough. He threw his hands out. The air thickened. Every bone froze mid-flight. Hung there, skinning slowly. Silence fell except for smoke alarms screaming. Chaos' nose started bleeding instantly. His knees buckled, but he held them. Held every single bone. Back, he whispered. The bone shuddered, then reversed, slamming back into walls, into hidden cavities, into history that did not want to be remembered. Plaster sealed. Silence. Chaos collapsed. Later, after paramedics cleared everyone and the fire damage was assessed, and Dorothea insisted on still serving cake because trauma requires frosting, Chaos sat beside Gumbo on the back steps. "You okay?" Chaos asked. Gumbo rubbed his chest slowly. "Doctor says my heart is
Complicated, he said.
like a root canal. Necessary. Painful. Expensive in ways that ain't always money." Chaos nodded. Inside, music played again Madonna, louder now, like defiance. Jermaine stood alone in the yard, staring at nothing, jaw tight, ghosts of relapse pacing behind his eyes. The wind moved through the bonsai trees, and deep in the walls, something shifted again. Not bonds. Something else. Waiting, watching, and learning. Chapter 6, the birthday that broke the walls. They came home in the passenger seat of a semi-truck that looked like it had survived 3 divorces, 2 small wars, and at least one incident involving illegal fireworks and a waffle iron. The driver had 3 arms. Not metaphorically. Not in a wow, he multitasks way. 3 actual arms, each sunburned, freckled, and tattooed with faded nautical stars, and what might have once been a mermaid, but now looked like a potato with hair. His name was Dale, and he smelled like diesel fuel, peppermint gum, and stubborn kindness. Chaos sat slumped against the window, still caked in dirt. Anne curled across his lap, exhausted, her small magical horse ears drooping like wet paper. Dale steered with one hand, shifted gears with another, and occasionally handed Chaos pretzels with a third. "Y'all picked a bad day to get buried," Dale said conversationally. "Does weird stuff to soil density." Chaos blinked slowly. "That,
It's not how dirt works."
Dale shrugged. "Tell that to dirt." They rolled past fields, gas stations, telephone poles humming with invisible electricity. Chaos watched the sky, feeling the faintest whisper of his power returning, like static after a storm. By the time the convent came into view, white walls, glowing gold in late afternoon sun, his chest felt warmer. Not strong, but not empty anymore. Dorothea was waiting at the gate. She ran, sprint, bare feet slapping gravel. When she reached Chaos, she grabbed his face, then pulled him into a hug so tight his ribs popped. "You smell like death," she said into his shoulder. "Accurate," he said. Gumbo stood behind her, leaning heavier than usual on his cane. His smile was wide but tired around the edges. The last few weeks had carved new lines into his face.
A health scare, whatever the doctors had found, and then unfound still hovered over him like a storm cloud pretending to be decorative.
He hugged Chaos anyway. "You scared me, boy," he said softly.
Chaos swallowed hard.
"I'm okay." Nodded, but didn't look convinced. Nearby, Cato stood with Sean, arms folded, eyes shining with relief she was trying very hard to hide. Jermaine leaned against the porch rail, jittery, too alert, eyes darting like birds. Chaos clocked it instantly. The tremor in Germain's fingers, the hollow hunger in his eyes, an old familiar ghost whispering crack cocaine back into his bloodstream. And Chaos said nothing, not yet. And Dorothea clapped her hands suddenly. "Okay," she said too brightly. "Emergency change of plans. We're combining your birthday party with a welcome home celebration because emotionally I cannot survive another event this month." Chaos blinked. "It's my birthday?" And Gumbo coughed. "Technically, was yesterday. I was buried yesterday. Still counts," Dorothea said firmly. The party started soft. Streamers. Cake. Someone had put on Madonna one of the old dance tracks Ann Cato, who had been obsessing over Madonna for months, like she was studying for a spiritual exam. Immediately started explaining the historical importance of every synth line to anyone trapped within 6 feet of her. Sean nodded politely while eating cake like a hostage. Clottled organized drinks with military precision. Loon and Merrick hung lights across the bonsai garden. Just a fragile, shimmering moment life felt normal. Then the bones woke up. It started with a sound inside the walls. Not a bang, not a crack, a rattle, like wind chimes. Gumbo froze. Chaos saw it immediately. The look in his father's eyes, the secret nobody talked about, the bones inside the convent walls. The ones from long ago, the ones Gumbo had won quietly, privately used to make wind chimes, when he thought they were just old relics. Another rattle. The plaster cracked, and bones burst out. Dozens, maybe hundreds, yellowed, polished, some still tied together with old rosary strings. They shot through the air like panicked birds. Someone screamed or smashed into a table. A rib sliced through a banner. A skull ricocheted off a cabinet and shattered a punch bowl. A small fire sparked when a bone hit a hot plate. Flames licked up a curtain before Clottle smothered it with a tablecloth, but not before smoke filled the kitchen, and someone inhaled enough to drop coughing to the floor. Harrowing, fast, chaotic. Dorothea slipped and hit her shoulder. Sean took a rib to the forehead. Loon dove behind a counter as a spine clattered across tile like thrown chain. Chaos stood in the center of it, heart pounding, magic flickering back like a dying fluorescent bulb. "Not now," he whispered. Another skull flew toward Anne. Chaos snapped. Power flooded back not full strength, but enough. He threw his hands out. The air thickened. Every bone froze mid-flight, hung there, spinning slowly. Silence fell, except for smoke alarms screaming.
Chaos' nose started bleeding instantly.
His knees buckled, but he held every single bone. "Back," he whispered. The bones shuddered, then reversed, slamming back into walls, into hidden cavities, into history that did not want to be remembered. Plaster sealed. Chaos collapsed. Later, after paramedics cleared everyone and the fire damage was assessed and Dorothea insisted on Dondernan, still serving cake because trauma requires frosting, Chaos sat beside Gumbo on the back steps. "You okay?" Chaos asked. Gumbo rubbed his chest slowly. "Doctor says my heart is complicated," he said. "Like a root canal. Necessary. Painful. Expensive in ways that ain't always money." Chaos nodded. Inside, music played Again Madonna, louder now, like defiance. Germain stood alone in the yard, staring at nothing, jaw tight, ghosts of relapse pacing behind his eyes. The wind moved through the bonsai trees. And deep in the walls, something shifted again. Nah, not bones, something else. Waiting, watching, and learning.
Chapter 7, The Gentle Uprising. The little plants with faces spread quietly at first, like gossip or mold showing up in herb gardens, window boxes, cracks in sidewalks, even inside a forgotten boot by the convent back door. Their tiny green faces blinked in sunlight, squinted in rain, and occasionally made expressions that felt just a little too knowing. They weren't malicious. If anything, they were needy. One outside the kitchen window cried dew tears when Dorothea forgot to water it. Another in the bonsai garden beamed proudly whenever Chaos walked by, like a kid waiting for approval from a favorite teacher. The drama came when the plants started reacting emotionally to human argument sleeves, trembling during shouting matches, stems curling protectively when someone cried. One afternoon, during a heated discussion about seating charts for Cato and Sean's increasingly bizarre wedding plans, which now included exchanging vows inside a rotating greenhouse, while guests wore mismatched vintage shoes, the plants around the courtyard all simultaneously fainted, their tiny faces going slack as if overwhelmed by second-hand embarrassment. Meanwhile, far from the convent, two members of the extended circle, Loon and Merrick, had quietly slipped to New York, chasing a lead about the origin of the faceplants and possibly the talisman. No one knew they were there except Professor Voss, who discovered it through a credit card alert and then spent 2 sleepless nights wrestling with whether to tell anyone, until a frantic late-night call revealed they had broken into a Manhattan penthouse owned by a reclusive biotech collector who might have been experimenting with plant neural mapping. Suddenly, Voss found himself compelled to talk first to Clotilde, then to Gumbo, because the kids weren't just trespassing. They were trapped after triggering a silent alarm in a place lined with 2-way mirrors that made every hallway feel like it had eyes. Back at the convent, stress rippled outward. Someone mentioned peeping Toms during a conversation about surveillance, which made Sister Bernice throw a walnut at a wall, just to release tension. During evening prayers, a string of old rosary beads snapped and scattered across marble tile. When they settled, they formed a single word that made everyone freeze. Remember! Not you! Not a threat! Just deeply, uncomfortably specific. Then, as if the universe wanted to underline the moment with physical punctuation, a small earthquake rolled through, nothing catastrophic, just enough to rattle cabinets, knock a Designing Women DVD set off a shelf, and make the faceplants all look upward in synchronized curiosity. Elsewhere, in the call center break room, someone had awkwardly donated a medical device box labeled penis pump to a miscellaneous lost and found shelf, where it sat ignored but faintly symbolic of how weird life had gotten. That night, while aftershocks tickled the foundation and Cato and Sean argued lovingly over whether their reception should feature live doves or synchronized roller skaters, Ralph the parrot cleared his throat and delivered, in one uninterrupted breath, a memory-soaked monologue. I saw the Beastmaster when I was young, and everything smelled like popcorn and carpet glue, and I thought, wow, this guy talks to animals and has ferrets and throws knives, and it felt like the world was big and dangerous, but also understandable because loyalty meant something, and even though the special effects were wobbly and everyone looked slightly sweaty, it taught me that sometimes destiny is just stubborn. survival, and also I still don't trust priests in fantasy movies or anyone who owns more than 3 cloaks, but mostly I remember thinking that being able to talk to animals is less about magic and more about listening when something small and scared is trying to tell you it matters. Outside under sodium streetlights, the faceplants turned slowly toward the convent windows, like a crowd watching a stage, and hundreds of tiny expressions, hopeful, worried, curious, watched the humans try to hold their complicated, fragile world together. And then, in a dream, for some inexplicable reason, Chaos started dreaming of an alternate version of his rescue from Brisby intended early grave. The ground above Chaos and Anai was heavy, damp, and smelled like old roots and rusted pennies. Dirt pressed against Chaos's ears until every heartbeat sounded like someone knocking from inside his skull. Anna, small and trembling beside him in the cramped underground pocket Brigsby had left them in, snorted softly, her magic flickering like a dying flashlight. Whatever field Brigsby had dragged them into, some forgotten patch of Texas land where the sky always looked slightly bruised, was swallowing power like a sponge. Chaos tried anyway. Nothing. Not even a spark. Somewhere above them, wind scraped across scrub brush and distant highway noise hummed like a tired refrigerator. Chaos swallowed mouthfuls of dirt taste and said, "We are not dying in a hole because that creep thinks he's smarter than us." Anai nudged his shoulder and let out a shaky whinny that almost sounded like agreement. Above ground, something unexpected was already moving. The little faceplants had followed, not in a fast, dramatic horror movie way, in a slow, persistent, unsettling way. Tiny stems pushing through soil, small green faces blinking awake in the moonlight. One plant near the burial site frowned deeply, like it was concentrating very hard. Down the road, a pit bull puppy tied to a mailbox started barking hysterically at nothing visible. At the burial site, the dirt shifted. Chaos felt at first tiny trickles of loosened soil falling against his cheek. "Something's happening," he whispered. Anai kicked weakly. Not panic. Instinct. Above them, dozens of faceplants strained toward the buried pocket like paramedics who had never been trained but showed up anyway. Their roots threaded through soil, loosening it. Not digging! Persuading. Dirt began collapsing inward in soft, crumbly cascades. Chaos clawed upward. Ane pushed with her small but stubborn body. Dirt filled Chaos's mouth, his nose, his shirt collar. The smell of wet earth mixed with something sharp urine maybe, old fertilizer maybe, something human and neglected. Above ground, an owl watched from a dead tree branch, head rotating slowly like it was keeping score. The dirt ceiling gave. Cold night air rushed in like salvation. Chaos pulled himself out first, then dragged Ane free. Both of them lay in grass, gasping, coated in mud and shaking. Nearby sat a pink trash bag caught on barbed wire, fluttering like a cheap ghost. A bucket of rainwater reflected a warped moon. A half-crushed canned Coke glinted beside an empty bottle of cranberry soda. Someone had dumped a Taco Bell bag nearby, a smashed 7-layer burrito, bled beans, and sour cream into the dirt like a tragic mural. Chaos rolled onto his back. "I hate this town sometimes," he said. Anne snorted in agreement and sneezed mud. The pitbull puppy, now loose, came barreling toward them like a furry missile and immediately began licking Chaos's face like he was made of peanut butter. Chaos laughed despite everything. The kind of laugh that comes from surviving something you were absolutely not supposed to survive.
Then the plants did something new.
They turned their faces toward Chaos. All of them. Dozens, maybe hundreds, watching, not scary, not friendly, just attentive. Chaos sat up slowly. "Okay, that's new," he said. In the distance, Brigsby's truck engine roared to life. Headlights swept across the field once, searching, then peeled away toward the highway. He was gone. For now. Chaos stood, shaky but alive, and rested his forehead against Anaze's muddy mane. "We're getting home," he said. Anne stamped once, determined. On the walk back toward the highway, they passed a rusted sign pointing toward an old refugee aid route once used decades ago for shipments tied loosely to Sudan relief supply, lines half erased, sun-bleached history. Chaos barely noticed. He was too busy being alive. At the edge of the field, they found an abandoned shack. Inside, a cracked sink, a pile of old blankets, and a mildewed Afghan draped over a broken chair. Chaos wrapped it around his shoulders anyway. They sat there for a long minute, catching breath, listening to wind whistle through broken boards. Then Chaos said quietly, "I need to say something out loud before I lose my nerve." He stared at the floor. And then he spoke in one long rush. "I keep thinking about how power isn't lightning bolts, or glowing eyes, or any of that comic book garbage. It's surviving stuff that should have ended you. It's remembering who you are when someone tries to bury you literally or otherwise, and I think maybe these plants aren't here to hurt us. Maybe they're here because they're scared too. And maybe the universe is just a big messy place where even magic needs help. Sometimes. And if I ever get out of this alive, which I guess I just did, I'm going to stop acting like I have to be strong all the time, because even Anne gets scared and she's literally magic. And maybe being alive is already the miracle and everything else is just extra." Silence sat in the shack after that. Then the puppy barked once, like applause. Outside, the faceplants along the dirt road all slowly closed their eyes, like they had just witnessed something sacred. "Far away!" Sirens wailed toward some unrelated emergency. And in the dark space under the convent, inside the hidden wall cavity where bones no one talked about rested tangled together, something shifted. Not violently, not loudly. Just enough to make dust fall like gray snow. And somewhere deep in the town, a single faceplant opened its mouth for the first time and tried unsuccessfully to form a word. Chapter 7, The Garden Learns Manners. The little faceplant started the drama on a Tuesday morning, which somehow felt appropriate.
Not evil.
Not apocalyptic. Just socially. They had begun migrating slowly, uprooting themselves and relocating into places that were deeply inconvenient but emotionally charged. One lined up perfectly along Sister Clotilde's windowsill and frowned disapprovingly whenever anyone lied within earshot. 3 more planted themselves in the convent courtyard and began mimicking facial expressions of whoever walked by, smiling when smiled at, scowling when scowled at, and once copying Dorothea's exhausted "I need coffee or I will legally become a ghost" face so accurately that it made her drop her mug. One sprouted inside a bag of walnuts in the kitchen pantry and made tiny chewing motions, which unsettled everyone enough that the walnuts were respectfully relocated outside. None of it felt malicious. It felt like the town had suddenly acquired awkward, observant toddlers made of chlorophyll. Meanwhile, Cato and Sean had quietly begun planning the strangest wedding anyone had ever not announced. Their working draft involved a sunset ceremony in a drained public swimming pool. Guests required to wear mismatched formal wear. Think patent leather boots paired with bathrobes. And vows exchanged while standing inside a circle of antique televisions playing static. Cato wanted live doves released. Sean countered with trained raccoons. The compromise currently sat at possibly trained pigeons wearing ribbon bows. They were weirdly happy, though neither had told anyone yet. Sean had started sketching invitation designs that looked like vintage concert tickets.
Cato had started practicing saying "my husband" in mirrors when she thought nobody was watching.
Across the country, 2 people were already in very bad decisions. Loon and Merrick had absolutely, definitely not told anyone they had taken a last-minute trip to New York. Not the museum. Not Clotilde. Not even Gumbo. They were currently inside a Manhattan penthouse that belonged to a hedge fund manager who collected antique medical devices and, bizarrely, vintage penis pumps displayed in glass cases like cursed museum artifacts. The break-in itself had gone suspiciously smoothly. The problem was the 2-way mirrors. There were far more than expected. At least 6 rooms where you couldn't tell who was watching who. Merrick had developed an immediate paranoia about peeping Tom scenarios and refused to turn his back on any reflective surface. They weren't sure what they were looking for anymore, only that they had found something big enough to make their stomachs hurt. Back home, the only person who knew was Professor Boss. And he found out by accident when Merrick panic called him at 3 a.m. Eastern Time. Voss listened quietly, said nothing for almost a full minute, then hung up, then immediately booked a flight, because he knew if anyone else found out, it would become a disaster measured in news helicopters. Back at the convent, mid-afternoon, the town experienced a small earthquake. No, is it? You've got to own it. Not dramatic. Just enough to rattle cabinets and make a few picture frames fall crooked. The face plants all froze simultaneously, like deer sensing a storm. In the chapel, a string of rosary beads hanging near the altar snapped and scattered across marble tile. The beads rolled, clicked, settled, and spelled a word. Not supernatural glowing horror. Just a very clear, deeply unpleasant English word no one wanted to say out loud. Sister Clotilde quietly swept them into a dustpan and said nothing, which was somehow worse. That night during dinner was playing reruns of Designing Women, and one of the faceplants had positioned itself directly in front of the screen, watching intently, occasionally trying to mimic Julia Sugarbaker's facial expressions, and failing in a way that was oddly charming. Later, in the courtyard, while everyone tried to pretend life was normal, Ralph the parrot demanded attention. Merrick had left a voice memo before losing phone signal, and someone had played it out loud. At the end of it, Ralph began speaking, and then speaking more, and then wouldn't stop until someone started recording. And then came the monologue, exactly as spoken, one breath, one flow. You want to know why the Beastmaster matters, and I mean really matters, not just swords and shirtless guys and ferrets doing espionage, but the whole thing about being able to talk to animals, and not in a Disney way, but in a lonely survival way, like you are the only thing in the world that understands them, and they understand you. And that movie came out in a time when people still believed wilderness meant something spiritual and scary and sacred all at once, and yeah, it's cheesy, and yeah, the costumes look like they were sewn by raccoons, but it's about connection and exile and power that comes from empathy, not domination. And if you don't get emotional about that, then I question your emotional range as a mammal. Nobody spoke for a full 10 seconds after. Then Chaos said quietly, Ralph's been watching cable again. That night, as everyone went to bed uneasy but not afraid, the smallest faceplant yet pushed up through a crack in the convent courtyard brick. It blinked, looked around, and smiled. Chapter 8, Games People Play. The town woke under a sky that looked like old cassette tape, plastic faded, cloudy, humming with something unsaid. The little faceplants had multiplied overnight, though now they seemed less interested in observation and more interested in participation. One had dragged a box of colored pencils off a classroom shelf at St. Agnes and spent an hour arranging them by emotional vibe instead of actual color-angry reds, separated from peaceful reds, lonely blues, stacked apart from confident blues. Sister Clotilde stared at it, arms crossed, and finally muttered that if plants were going to develop taste, they should at least respect the difference between cerulean and navy. By noon, the courtyard had become a strange arena of low-stakes competition. Someone had chalked a giant checkerboard onto the stone. Half the town was playing checkers. The other half insisted on turning it into chess, moving pieces diagonally while arguing about strategy and destiny, and whether pawns deserved emotional backstories. Chaos watched for a while, pink socks visible between cuff jeans and boots, quietly enjoying the nonsense until a passing stranger delivery driver, nobody important, the kind of person history forgets, made a comment. The kind of comment that pretends to be a joke. The kind that lands like broken glass. Something about colored pencils and then uglier, something about colored people. The words hung in the air like a bad smell. Chaos didn't explode, didn't perform, didn't educate. He just went still. Dorothea stepped forward first, voice flat as a steel ruler, and told the man to leave before she invented new definitions of embarrassment. The man laughed, like people do when they realize they've stepped into moral quicksand, but still think they can swagger out of it. He left fast when the faceplants all turned toward him at once and made matching disapproving expressions. Chaos sat on the chapel steps afterward, quiet, watching two kids argue about whether Pictionary should allow sound effects. Loon handed him a box of colored pencils without saying anything. He took them, started drawing checkerboards that slowly turned into chessboards, then into grids of Roman numerals E, V, X, L stacking like quiet monuments. The numbers made him think about the Roman Empire. How long it lasted. How much of it was power and how much was paperwork. How entire civilizations fall because people get too comfortable being cruel. When in Rome, Merrick said gently, sitting beside him, you still get to decide who you are. Chaos nodded once. Across town, the Rec Room TV had switched from sitcom reruns to a chaotic loop of 80s music videos. Synth drums. Hairspray architecture. Neon emotional confusion. Someone had taped a newspaper clipping of Nancy Kerrigan to the wall years ago for reasons no one remembered, and now a faceplant had grown beside it, occasionally tilting its head like it was trying to understand competition, grace, public spectacle, and the strange human ritual of turning pain into broadcast entertainment. The ground gave one small aftershock tremble, barely noticeable but enough to make dust drift from ceiling beams like tired confetti. And then there was Jermaine. Jermaine hadn't been sleeping.
You've got to own it. Not really.
He'd been disappearing in smaller and smaller ways for months, and now it was accelerating. His apartment smelled like burnt sugar and chemical ghosts. The blind stayed closed. The mirror over the sink had been cracked for weeks, and he talked to the fracture line like it was a horizon. Crack cocaine didn't arrive in his life like a monster. It arrived like relief, then like routine, then like gravity. By the time anyone realized how deep he was sliding, he was already measuring time in cravings instead of hours. Already selling things he once swore he'd never sell. Already lying with a smoothness that scared him when he caught himself doing it. He still had moments of clarity. They were the worst part, because in those moments, he knew exactly what was happening to him. That afternoon, he sat on his kitchen floor, radio playing muffled 80s love songs through a blown speaker, pink pharmacy receipt paper scattered around him like fallen petals, and he really tried to remember what hope used to feel like in his body. Back at the convent, as evening settled, the faceplants arranged themselves into 2 perfect rows along the courtyard path, like a living audience. Nobody knew if it meant welcome or warning, or or simply that the town was becoming something new and nobody had voted on it. Above them, the sky darkened into that deep vinyl record black. And somewhere, far away, Professor Voss's plane began its descent toward consequences nobody could outrun. Chapter 8, Prognosis, Parrots, and Other Terrible Omens. Professor Voss had always walked like a man who believed floors should feel honored to be stepped on. Even now, stepping off a late flight into damp southern night air, suit wrinkled from travel and secrets. He still carried that posture, though, tonight. It sagged just enough to suggest the universe had finally sent him a strongly worded letter. Loon and Merrick waited near baggage claim, pretending to argue about groceries milk versus almond milk, cereal versus dignity, but really they were watching him the way adult children watch a parent who might be about to confess something enormous and ugly and overdue. The dynamic between the three of them had always lived in that strange, almost family zone. Voss was mentor, yes. Academic shepherd, yes. But also something heavier. He had helped them through master's degree applications, breakups, existential crises, and that one semester where Merrick tried to major in fantasy world cartography because he swore emotional geography should be accredited. There was love there. Pressure. And the weird invisible rope that ties people together when they survive weirdness as a unit. Tonight that rope felt frayed. They drove in silence until Voss finally said, "There's a case, and you're already inside it, whether you want to be or not." That was when the bizarre part started. Because the case wasn't just academic misconduct or museum funding fraud or stolen artifacts like they'd half expected. It involved sealed and bound documents from the convent archives, documents nobody should have had access to. Documents that tied to the bones in the walls. The wind chimes. The blackmail rumors. The Guatemala whispers. The faceplants. The talisman. All of it. Like someone had taken every weird loose thread from the past year and braided them into a rope sturdy enough to hang a city with. And the grim prognosis? The documents suggested the convent had once been investigated not for crime exactly, but for ritual-adjacent activity.
Not proven.
Not charged. Just noted. Old files referencing fringe religious groups, outsider belief systems, and one very cautious paragraph that used the word Satanism, the way a librarian might handle a spider, carefully, at arm's length, hoping it doesn't jump. Nobody said anything for a long time. Finally, Merrick whispered, "So we're in the part of the story where history isn't dead. It's just filing paperwork." Voss nodded. Then he dropped the real bomb. A handwriting analysis expert, retired, eccentric, possibly living out of a converted harp case, had been examining old letters connected to the convent. Letters thought lost. Letters recently found at a garage sale in Baton Rouge between a box of baseball cards and a ceramic frog ashtray. The expert believed multiple letters were written by someone still alive. Someone currently close to the convent. Someone protecting something. The car went quiet again except for late-night radio ads for $5 crack rock-coded language, Fast talk, street poetry disguised as economics. Nobody commented. They all heard it. They all filed it under things Germaine cannot hear right now. Back at the convent grounds, life tried very hard to feel normal. Dorothea and Gumbo argued lovingly about grocery lists. Chaos helped a faceplant sort playing cards by emotional honesty. A harpist hired for a wedding that wasn't official yet practiced under the oak tree, notes drifting like expensive sadness. And this is where two long floating plot threads finally click together like cheap motel handcuffs. Thread 1, the bones in the convent walls. Thread 2, the faceplants and talisman disrupting powers. The documents suggested the convent wasn't built on cursed ground. And it was built on containment ground. Long ago, no one knew exactly when something had been sealed into the land. Not evil exactly. Not good either. More like raw belief. The kind that bends reality if too many people aim it the same direction. The bones in the walls weren't victims. They were anchors. Spiritual lightning rods. Human history used like rebar. The talisman. A key. Or maybe a governor. Something that regulated how much weird leaked into the world. The faceplants weren't invaders. They were pressure gauges, meaning the recent chaos wasn't random. It was system failure, meaning if they stabilized it, life could maybe return to weird but livable instead of weird and apocalyptic. Moderate drama. Not constant catastrophe. Breathing room. Hoop, basically. Gotta own it. Later that night, Clotilde caught Loon watching Merrick help Chaos fix a broken game console. Something soft crossed Loon's face-tired affection. Old sibling loyalty, the quiet promise of I survived childhood because you did too. Mother and sib bonds were complicated like that. Not always biological. Sometimes forged through shared disasters and borrowed cereal bowls. Careful, Clotilde said gently. This family eats people alive, then loves them forever. Meanwhile, trashy humor refused to die. Ralph the parrot had learned to yell, "Slave master," whenever someone hoarded pretzels. A faceplant had grown inside a manwich can. Someone found a box labeled Fantasy World Taxes, 1997 in storage, and nobody wanted to open it. And then the flirtation. Small. Quick. Dangerous. Dorothea, late night walk, moonlight, groceries in hand. The new grocery delivery driver, tired eyes, kind smile, absolutely not part of this circus yet held the door for her. They talked. Too long for strangers. Not long enough to be safe. Nothing happened. But something almost did. And as she walked away, hot doing that confused midlife drum solo thing, she noticed carved faint into the delivery van dashboard. A tiny symbol. Upside down star. Sloppy. Probably meaningless. Probably just someone's edgy phase. Probably.
Chapter 9, Hot Pink Consequences and the Geography of Forgiveness. Trouble, as it turned out, didn't explode. Me! It lingered. It hung in rooms like humidity and old arguments and the smell of furniture polish nobody had used since 1984. Loon and Merrick sat across from Cloddled in the convent's back library, the one with the old books that smelled like dust, vanilla and quiet guilt. Shelves leaned slightly inward, like the room was trying to listen. Somewhere outside, bumblebees bounced drunkenly off hydrangeas like fuzzy existential philosophers. Mirror! Cloddled wasn't yelling. Me? That was worse. She said, calm as a sealed coffin lid. May? Loon swallowed. May? Merrick stared at a weird map spread across the table hand-drawn coastlines, shell road markings, symbols that might have been churches or might have been something older and less friendly. The map had shown up in the same garage sale box as the letters. Nobody had explained why Shell Roads those crushed shell coastal paths used for drainage and cheap travel were marked like pilgrimage routes.
We thought we could fix it first, Merrick said.
Clotilde nodded slowly, Roman nose casting a long, judgmental shadow across the paper. Why, you could protect me from Nolly. May? Loon's voice came out softer. We thought we were protecting everyone. Silence. Me? Then Cloddled leaned back, exhaled, and rubbed her temples like a woman negotiating with a migraine and destiny simultaneously. Me. She said finally, are the emotional equivalent of pallbearers who keep trying to carry coffins alone. May? That hit harder than yelling. Because she wasn't wrong. Meow. The trouble they'd been in digging into sealed convent records without clearance. Triggering whatever subtle spiritual pressure spike had caused the last wave of faceplant weirdness had, nearly cost Cloddled her position. Nearly exposed the convent to attention it absolutely did not want. Nearly open questions about history nobody living wanted to answer. And she had pulled them out anyway. May? Connections. May? You favors. Academic intimidation deployed with surgical cruelty. What? One very tense meeting involving a bishop, 2 lawyers, and a man who looked like he'd been born wearing a suit in disappointment. Technically. May. Not so much. You don't get. Cloddled said, voice gentler now. Want to be adults in this? May? Then you carry it together. Or no. Something shifted then. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Not cinematic. Me? More like bones settling after a long, cold night. Loon reached across the table. Me? Merrick didn't hesitate. Me? Claude covered both their hands. Family. Family in the weird chosen sense. Mother energy. Sibling loyalty. Shared survival. Man. The kind of bond forged when life keeps trying to throw you into metaphorical wood chippers and you keep climbing out, covered in emotional confetti and poor decisions. Me? Outside, Ralph the parrot screamed something that sounded suspiciously like HOT Pink Judgment DAY, which nobody chose to unpack. Across town, normal life staged a stubborn little rebellion. Cora and Sean were planning a wedding with the determined cheerfulness of people who refuse to let cosmic horror ruin cake tasting. May? The venue sample table was aggressively hot pink because the rental company had misunderstood subtle blush tones and doubled down with violent enthusiasm. Cora loved it anyway. Said it felt like joy refusing to apologize. Sean was testing sound equipment when Scott wandered in, stared into the rehearsal hall mirror, and completely unprompted performed a full Christian hymn to his own reflection with the intensity of a man either finding God or auditioning for divine backup vocals. Nobody stopped him. Me. The acoustics were incredible.
While sorting invitation drafts, they found old books in storage boxes, family Bibles, recipe journals,
one binder full of antique baseball card price guides for reasons nobody could explain.
Man? Tucked inside one book was a receipt from a roadside antique shop on a coastal shell road. Same road from Merrick's Weird May. Handwriting as one of the garage sale letters. Wedding planning had just quietly collided with the convent mystery. Neither of them knew it yet. Back at the convent, night settled in layers. Walked the grounds alone, passing the oak tree where the harpists sometimes practiced, passing garden beds where bumblebees slept inside flowers like tiny fur-coated monks. Me, the air felt calmer. Not fair. Not fixed. Not safe. Me. But stable. Like a patient moved from ICU to observation. Moderate drama territory. Me.
Inside, Loon and Merrick were already working again, this time with permission, with Clothild included, with shared risk instead of secret hero complexes.
May! They pinned the weird map beside archive photos. Trade routes matched early settlement patterns. Settlement patterns matched the dates. The bones were added to the convent walls. Not random. Never random. Containment wasn't local. Me! It was regional. May. Maybe bigger. Me. That. Belief is pressure, he said quietly. Then this whole coast might be... Loon didn't answer. But she didn't disagree. And somewhere, deep in the convent structure, something old shifted slightly. Not waking. The kind of movement that makes history sit up straighter. May. And outside, on a quiet stretch of shell road under indifferent stars, a delivery van idled for a moment longer than necessary before driving on. Dashboard symbol catching moonlight for half a second like an eye opening. May? Then darkness again. May. Chapter 10, The Wound That Whispers.
Convent smelled like antiseptic and burned coffee and secrets that had been folded and refolded so many times they were starting to tear at the creases.
Gumbo sat at the long wooden table with fresh bandaging peeking from beneath his shirt collar, Dorothea hovering nearby with the quiet, focused intensity of someone who had memorized 3 different pamphlets on post-surgical wound care and did not trust any of them fully. Here, as she understood it, was part science, part prayer, part watching for tiny changes nobody else noticed. Brain fog still drifted through Gumbo's thoughts like low coastal mist. Sometimes he forgot the ends of sentences. Sometimes he remembered things from 40 years ago with painful clarity, like the smell of diesel fuel and river water and fear. You're not dying, Dorothea said for the 4th time that morning. Me? I know, Gumbo said. Me?
But I am negotiating with the idea.
Outside, the little faceplants watched the windows like polite, concerned neighbors. Me? Chaos was not at the convent. Chaos was at a place nobody expected trouble. The public library. It started near the genealogy section, under a display about Roman history where someone had left a pair of novelty Roman sandals on a chair as part of some forgotten educational exhibit.
May! Chaos had been helping an elderly volunteer scan old parish records when 3 older teens cornered him between the microfilm cabinets and the copy machine. The words they used were ugly.
Chop! May! May!
kind of language that smells like mildew and bad history.
Meh. Nobody else heard it at first because the building's AC unit was rattling like a dying spaceship.
Chaos did not use his powers. Nah. Stood still.
Let them finish.
Meow! Memorize their faces the way his father had taught him, like you memorize exits in a burning building. Meh. Then the elderly volunteer rounded the corner and froze, eyes going hard as river stone.
Nice.
Here, she said, voice low and final.
May? The boys left, muttering suddenly small.
May?
Chaos shook after. Nice. Dramatic. Nice.
Quietly.
Me? Like a phone on silent. May? Later, driving home past coastal sand dunes glowing gold in late afternoon light, he pressed his forehead to the glass and watched the horizon blur. Some moon didn't bleed where anyone could see. Life kept being weird in ways that felt almost rude. Waiting room, flipping through a brochure about colonoscopy prep while trying not to laugh at the cartoon colon wearing ruby slippers on the cover for Awareness Month. Medical humor is always written by someone who has never had to drink that prep solution. Wow. Across from her, a man in a hospital gown played Yahtzee on his phone and whispered dice results like they were sacred numerology. In a private room down the hall, Germaine was recovering from a minor procedure, catheter bag hanging like an unwanted accessory, staring at the ceiling and thinking about how fragile bodies really were. Recovery had stripped him down to basics. Breathe, heal, try again tomorrow. May! Back at the convent archive room, Loon had found something new. A translated news clipping.
May!
Foreign language originally. Wow! Coastal. Old. Man? The man who grew a tree and became one. The article described a religious hermit who had planted a tree as a teenager, then spent decades tending it, living beside it, refusing to leave. Me? Villagers claim bark began appearing along his arms in old age. When he died, they buried him beneath the tree, and within a year the trunk had split into two twisting shapes like fused bodies. Merrick read it twice. May? Metaphor, he said. Maybe, Loon said.
Neither sounded convinced.
Me? At dusk, a group of sailors arrived unexpectedly at the convent gate cargo ship crew on temporary shore leave, asking if the rumors were true about the garden with faces.
May!
We're polite son, smelling like salt and engine. Nay. Dorothea gave them lemonade and gently redirected them toward the public botanical garden instead.
The ocean had started sending people.
May. That felt like a sigh.
Of why? Nobody knew yet. Night fell.
Well, Parrot climbed onto the back of a dining chair, fluffed himself dramatically, and began what would become the longest monologue any living creature in that room had ever survived. May, Water Tower, Ralph declared, are the great quiet heroes of civilization, do you understand? May, you put water up high, you get pressure, you get flow, you get life, you get showers that don't feel like a sad drip from God's leaky roof. Penicillin, my frenzy's the water tower of the human body. Store. Defense up high in the tower of bloodstream. You distribute hope through the pipes of veins.
You kill the little invaders before they build apartments in your lungs.
May and water towers stand over towns like sentinels.
Penicillin stands over your cells like a bouncer at a very rude nightclub.
May
You run like you stole something from history.
May. Water towers are excellent places for first kisses, secret meetings, and the occasional existential crisis.
Nobody interrupted.
He demanded crackers and emotional validation. Later that night, Dorothea changed Gumbo's bandage under soft yellow light.
The surgical wound looked clean.
Healing.
Slow but honest.
Me.
He said.
Me? But his eyes were somewhere else. Dorothea, he said quietly. Why? Do you remember the story Sister Bernice told? About the murder in Guatemala?
She did.
None found dead in a storage room.
No clear suspect.
May?
Official report vague.
Me?
Unofficial whispers.
Me?
And the bones, Gumbo said.
Yes.
And Brigsby knowing things he shouldn't. Outside, wind moved over the dunes.
May. Inside the walls, something made a faint clicking sound. Me. Like ceramic. Me. Near midnight, chaos woke suddenly. Not from a dream. Mad. From a feeling. Me. Like someone had just walked over his grave. Downstairs in the archive room, the weird map had fallen off the wall. Behind it. Another layer. Odor. Handwritten. Me. Near. Written in ink still slightly wet. A single location circled. Not foreign. Me. Not distant. Local. Very local. Me? Directly under the convent. Me? And at that exact moment, every face on every tiny plant in the garden turned toward the same point beneath the earth. Waiting. Me. And then May knocked back from underground. Far. May. And then again.
Chapter 11. The first rumors slid through the convent like olive oil across warm glass, silent, slick, unstoppable. By mid-morning, Sister Clotilde stood in the chapel inside of the convent, staring up at the rafters where dust and history and maybe worse things nested together, her velour sleeve brushing against old chenille altar cloths that smelled faintly of incense and Maybelline powder from decades of hurried pre-mass touch-ups, the former sisters some still devout. Some philosophical sellouts, by their own joking admission, had just finalized the paperwork to acquire the abandoned school for the blind down the road, past the malt shop, past the cracked telephone poles, past the lot where someone once tried to raise parsnips, parsley and radishes in pure sand and stubborn faith. It should have felt like renewal. Instead, it felt like evidence. The building itself had parquet floor hallways and a bell tower that leaned a degree too far east, like it had tried to flee something once and failed. Bovine flies hovered lazily around broken windows. Rats squealed in the crawlspace like rusty hinges learning to scream. Someone had spray-painted Juicy Fruit Squad across the old cafeteria wall in letters that dripped like saliva lamp wax. Nobody knew who they were. Everyone pretended they did. Dorothea walked the perimeter in mom jeans and combat boots, clipboard in hand, swiping a card through a temporary security lock that beeped with the indifference of late capitalism. Gumbo trailed behind her, slower these days, brain fog still drifting in and out since his health scare, humming something tuneless and haunted while chaos kicked gravel and tried to look like the kind of kid who didn't hear. Racial insults in grocery aisles or school hallways, or sometimes whispered at intersections by people who thought nobody noticed. Inside, the sisters found rooms still set up. Braille textbooks, hummingbird skeletons pinned in a biology case, a storage closet filled with confiscated contraband novelty lighters, olive oil hair products, a coconut with a face drawn on it in Sharpie. One locker door still had a Wanda Sykes comedy sticker peeling off like a sunburn. Clotilde touched the wall and felt it pulse. Not heartbeat, not plumbing, something like memory having a muscle spasm. Meanwhile, down in the convent basement, Cato and Sean argued over wedding seating charts, while Germaine sat at the far end of the folding table, eyes hollow, hands restless, talking about Thailand like he'd lived 3 lives there already.
The talisman, the one nobody liked talking about, sat in the center of the table next to a bottle of douche water. Someone had accidentally brought thinking it was mineral water, and nobody had the heart to throw it away. Ralph the parrot kept whispering espionage, like he'd swallowed a spy novel and couldn't digest it. By late afternoon, chaos lowercase and uppercase began. Mayhem started small. A ringworm outbreak discovered in the old dorm wing, then a fire alarm triggered by nothing. Then security cameras glitching to show a forest clearing that didn't exist anywhere near Texas dense green. Humid. Something about it felt like Thailand or somewhere older than maps. Figures moved in it but never fully stepped into frame. Not loud. Just once, like a coin dropped in a deep well. At the exact same time, every credit card reader in the building started swiping phantom transactions. Over and over. Gumbo felt a cramp in his chest that wasn't quite pain but wasn't friendly either. Chaos grabbed his arm and suddenly every plant with a face back at the bonsai garden turned toward the road leading to the school. At sunset, Sister Clothild climbed the bell tower stairs alone. Halfway up, she found a trail of olive oil footprints. Fresh. At the top, hanging from the bell rope, was a strip of fabric hot pink, expensive, unmistakably modern, pinned there with a juicy fruit wrapper and a hotel keycard from a place that no longer existed. When she touched it, the bell rang again. And every intercom in both the school and the convent clicked on at once. A child's voice spoke. Genderless, ancient and brand new. Heads or tails. Down below, every coin in every pocket flipped itself into the air. And none of them came down. Chapter 12. The coins never came down. They just hovered there over the convent courtyard like a constellation designed by an accountant having a nervous breakdown. For a full minute nobody moved. Then one coin slowly rotated and smacked Chaos in the forehead before clattering to the ground, which broke the spell enough for everyone to start yelling at once, which in turn caused 3 nuns, 2 former nuns, and one extremely confused delivery guy holding wontons and beet soup to all faint in synchronized, deeply Catholic horror. By sunrise, Father Delgado arrived, hair disheveled, barrette inexplicably clipped to his collar like he'd lost a bet, hauling a battered cassette recorder and a canvas cot into the chapel. He had the look of a man who had seen ventilators, exorcisms, and parish council bake sales and found them all equally exhausting. The poltergeist activity had escalated overnight. Ladles launching themselves from kitchen drawers, Vicks vapor rub jars opening and closing like tiny haunted clams, stop signs from down the road inexplicably appearing inside the chapel, and one trout materializing in a baptismal font like it had taken a wrong exit off reality. The long-standing problem nobody talked about the bones in the convent walls finally forced itself into the open when the priest began blessing the foundation and the entire north wall coughed up 3 femurs, a rib cage, and something that looked suspiciously like a picture frame filled with pitch-black pictures. Not photos of darkness, photos that were darkness. The kind that seemed to swallow light and memories at the same time. Father Delgado didn't scream. He just sighed and pulled out a small canister of butane and a vial of lidocaine, muttering, "If this doesn't work, I'm switching careers to horseback riding tour guide." Meanwhile, Dorothea discovered the thing nobody was supposed to discover. Behind the greenhouse, hidden inside a mound of decorative landscaping dirt, someone high level, someone with access had been growing marijuana plants, big ones, healthy ones, professionally loved ones. The kind that had probably seen more attentive care than most convent residents. The culprit turned out to be Clint. Clint, who arrived that morning in a dusty pickup smelling faintly of motor oil and lavender body spray, introducing himself as a traveling counselor for gay conversion therapy before immediately admitting he was gay, hated his job, and had been secretly tending the plants as a stress hobby. The confession happened while he ate cold wontons and explained crop rotation to Sister Clothild, who at that exact moment slipped on spilled beet soup and fell directly into his lap in front of Father Delgado, 2 visiting donors, and a parish live-stream camera still running from Sunday Mass. Compromising didn't even begin to cover it. While Clothild tried to stand up and Clint tried not to look delighted and apologetic at the same time, the priest finished the blessing and something shifted. Every bone vibrated once, then dissolved into fine dust. Then the dust slid into the cracks of the floor like it had finally found its way home. The poltergeist activity stopped instantly. And with it, the long-standing mystery of why the convent always felt crowded, even when it was empty. The bones had been acting like emotional antennae, amplifying guilt, secrets, and trauma into physical phenomena for decades. Problem solved. Horrifyingly. Neatly. But the weirdness wasn't done. Because right as everyone exhaled, one of Gumbo's old talking kidney stones, translucent, faintly glowing, sitting in a specimen jar on a shelf. Nobody remembered putting it on, cleared its non-existent throat. "Listen up," it said. "The ground remembers everything, and sometimes it decides to talk back." Outside, one of the little plants with faces now about knee-high, leaves like eyelash curlers, stems slightly bent like Cupid's arrow, opened a tiny mouth and repeated, "The ground remembers everything." Chaos stared at it. "Cool," he said. At sunset, Ralph the parrot launched into one of his infamous monologues, and everyone, even the priest, just let it happen. Annie Oakley. "I tell ya, she was the real deal, not this cosplay cowboy nonsense. She could shoot the eye out of a trout mid-jump and then cook IT with a ladle over a campfire while riding horseback and humming a duet with history itself. And don't you forget IT, because courage ain't loud, it's steady, like a stop sign in a dust storm. And if you ever find yourself in pitch black, holding nothing but a cassette tape of your worst decisions, you remember Annie didn't quit. And neither do you. Also never trust a man who owns more than 3 barrettes and smells like Vicks vapor rub and broken dreams." Later that night, Erica Kirk, local emergency nurse, occasional horseback riding instructor, and longtime friend of Dorothea's, arrived to check on Gumbo, whose health scare still lingered in the background like low thunder. She found him sitting on the chapel steps, staring at a picture of water someone had drawn in charcoal and pinned to the wall. "Feels like something big is coming," he said quietly. Behind him, the speaking plant turned toward the road. And in the distance, past the stop sign that definitely hadn't been there yesterday, too many headlights, all coming toward the convent at once. Chapter 13. Coffins, cakewalks in the clearing. The headlights never reached the convent. They stopped at the old abandoned church down the shell road, the one half swallowed by sand and vines. The one people pretended not to see on red-eye flights home when their taxis passed it at 2 a.m. The building had once been Catholic, briefly Pentecostal, then nothing but a rumor with a steeple. By morning, everyone knew something had happened there. No one knew what. Chaos and Loon were the first to reach it, boots crunching over sand that had drifted up against the warped doors like a shallow grave trying to inhale. A prairie dog popped its head up from the dunes, blinked at them with cosmic indifference, then vanished again. Inside, the church smelled like Cabernet Sauvignon and mildew. Theater seats, actual velvet theater seats, had been bolted into the nave at some point, facing an altar that now held spittoons and an orange steamer trunk instead of candles. Why do cults always redecorate like estate sales met a fever dream? Merrick muttered, stepping carefully around broken glass and darts embedded in the hymn boards. The trunk was open. Inside, a pair of ruby slippers, a lace bra, a straw hat, and a handwritten scorecard for Yahtzee. No explanation. Just objects that felt like punchlines without jokes. Behind the altar, someone had constructed an effigy out of driftwood and Catholic hymnals. It wore a sign around its neck that read, "Humiliation is a ritual." Chaos stared at it longer than the others did. There was no fire damage, no blood, no obvious mayhem, but there were coffins, 3 of them, closed, empty, lined with sand. Back at the convent, the ripple effects were already spreading. Clint had taken a red-eye flight to Oregon, claiming he needed to clear his head in the woodlands after the marijuana scandal and the beet soup incident. He left behind a suitcase in Dorothea's office. Inside it, chloracepape prescriptions with warning labels about side effects: confusion, agitation, canker sores, hallucinations. Also a business card for a migration body loss recovery retreat in Hot Springs, Arkansas, run by self-described rainbow people who promised healing beyond form. Nobody knew what that meant. Everyone agreed it sounded expensive. Meanwhile, Jermaine had disappeared. His apartment was empty except for a catheter bag in the bathroom trash and a Jackson 5 record spinning on repeat in a cracked stereo, the chorus looping until the needle clicked against vinyl like a metronome for regret. The abandoned church wasn't the only strange development. Sister Clotilde received a package that afternoon. No return address. Inside, a photograph of the convent courtyard, taken recently. In the picture, someone was kneeling in the corner on rice-old punishment style. Degradation masquerading as discipline, but the figure's face was blurred. Written across the bottom, "Coercion is not faith." Clotilde's hand shook, because she knew. Long before she wore the habit, before she carried herself like granite and mercy combined, there had been a moment in her own childhood Catholic school. Razor-burn knees. Humiliation disguised as obedience. It wasn't abuse in the criminal sense. It was something quieter, institutional. And the photograph suggested someone knew that story. Later that evening, Erica Kirk returned with news. The sheriff had found disturbed earth in a clearing in the woods beyond the abandoned church. But enough to raise the word amok in a town that preferred denial. They dug. They found nothing but sand and kangaroo bones, likely from an old traveling animal exhibit decades ago. Still, the symbolism felt pointed. The plot thickened in stranger directions. Merrick discovered that the handwriting from the earlier letters matched someone currently working at the school for the blind, a quiet facilities manager who never made eye contact, who once casually mentioned studying teratomas and ectopic pregnancies in a community college anatomy class for fun. The kind of detail that should have felt nerdy and harmless but landed like a dropped knife. Loon found a flyer tacked to a corkboard at the school advertising a cakewalk for the 4 food groups fundraiser. Beneath it, in smaller type, "Transvestigation panel discussion what they don't want you to know. Please tell me this is satire," Chaos said. Nobody laughed, and then there was the effigy. That night, under a moon that looked like it had been sanded down and reinstalled wrong, the effigy from the abandoned church appeared on the convent lawn. No footprints, no drag marks, just there, its wooden chest cavity now hollow. Inside it, a small carved figure shaped disturbingly like Clotilde literal deformity exaggerated, shoulders bent, head bowed. Around its neck hung a rosary twisted into lobster claw shapes, pinned to its chest, heads or tails. Chaos felt something crack open in his ribs that wasn't fear. The kind that moves civilizations. Behind him, one of the faceplants whispered, "Clearer now. They want us divided." The talking kidney stone chimed in from the chapel windowsill, glowing faintly. Division is the shallow grave of communities. In the distance, the bell tower began to ring. Not once, not twice, but steadily. Like a barbershop quartet from another dimension practicing the wrong hymn. And then a text message buzzed on Loon's phone. Unknown number. A picture attachment. It showed Jermaine. Standing in that same forest clearing from the security footage, the one that felt like Thailand and nowhere at once. Behind him, 6 coffins arranged in a circle. And someone else just outside the frame holding something metallic. The message beneath the photo read, "We are done asking." And the bell tower stopped mid-ring.
Chapter 14, Angels, Eagles, and the Geometry of Shock. The photo of Jermaine did not blink. But the coffins? Not physics. Not with lids popping open or horror movie theatrics. They blinked in the way memory blinks, shifting context when you stare too long. Loon zoomed in. Merrick adjusted the brightness. Chaos leaned so close his breath fogged the screen. The metallic object just outside the frame? Not a weapon. A mirror. And when Loon enhanced the contrast, they saw it clearly. The forest clearing wasn't foreign. It wasn't Thailand or some occult export. It was the back acreage behind the school for the blind, distorted through angled glass. The mind-blowing part hit all at once. There were no kidnappers. No ritual cult staging coffins. It was a performance. The facilities manager, the anatomy hobbyist with the unsettling smile, had been staging psychological theater. Effigies, coffins, symbolic humiliation. Not murder. Manipulate. The transvestigation flyers, the ritual language, the coercion is not faith message designed to fracture the convent community by weaponizing paranoia. Espionage disguised as superstition. And the coffins. Empty because they were props. Jermaine wasn't being buried. He was being bait. The long-standing containment ground mystery and the recent poltergeist escalation finally snapped together. The bones had amplified emotional trauma once dissolved. The amplification stopped. The rest of the effigies, the photos, the stage forest clearing had been human hands exploiting lingering fear. No demo! Just a yellow-bellied bastard with a taste for theater and grievance. Chaos exhaled something that felt like the first full breath in months. At that exact moment, Ralph the parrot flung himself onto the chapel lectern and delivered what would later be referred to in town legend as the Brinkley Sermon. Christy Brinkley did not survive the 80s for you people to lose your minds over a man with a fog machine and a grudge. She stood on the cover of history with wind in her hair like a bald eagle of confidence, and you think a couple of empty coffins are going to take you down? You know what beauty is? It's resilience in a bikini of truth. It's walking through a casino of chaos and not wiping yourself with leaves when there's a cloth in a tub right there. It's angel hair pasta at the Vatican and still having decent bowel movements. It's looking at a teddy bear holding an AC-47 and saying, "Nice try, sweetheart. We've seen a Clockwork Orange and we're not impressed." You want scans? You want fury? You want modern art made of your own confusion? Call Judy Garland and ask her how she kept singing. You people are stronger than a meth lab with a business plan. So stand up straight, adjust your feathers, and stop giving your power to anyone who spells ritual with a receipt book. Silence followed. Then laughter. Real laughter. The kind that breaks tension like open heart surgery breaks a rib cage unnecessary, terrifying, life-saving. And just like that, the hysteria cracked. They confronted the facilities manager with evidence security timestamps, mirrored angles, staged props traced to supply purchases. He folded fast. No code! No supernatural war! Just a man radicalized by online conspiracies, convinced he was exposing corruption by manufacturing spectacle.
He left town before sunset.
Problem resolved. 2 more loose threads quietly tied themselves off. The handwritten letters from the garage sale? Clint had purchased them years ago during his failed attempt at becoming a spiritual consultant. He admitted it in a voicemail from Oregon, apologizing for the melodrama and mentioning he'd found peace hiking under wet cedar skies.
And the mysterious phantom credit card swipes at the school?
Dorothea discovered the system had been linked to an old fundraising autopay, Luke donations from Nancy Reaganera alumni accounts still cycling through after decades. Bureaucratic haunting, not metaphysical. With those ghosts laid to rest, the story could finally breathe. Meanwhile, Dorothea and Clothild stood inside the school for the blind's main hall, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, reviewing renovation plans. The parquet floor needed refinishing. The bell tower wiring needed replacing. They walked room to room, making notes.
Classroom 1, Braille materials updated.
Classroom 2, remove outdated medical posters about the clap. Gymnasium, scrub for scabies and repaint. Dorothea held up a faded poster of a bald eagle clutching a Bible verse and said, "We're keeping this."
Irony is educational.
Clotilde smirked.
They talk budgets, grants, accessibility upgrades,
community outreach. The sisters former and current would staff it together.
Not as penitence, as perks.
Outside, someone had hung a small piece of modern art in the courtyard. A cracked mirror framed in driftwood titled Heads or Tails No More. It felt earned. Germain, however, was not at the convent. He'd taken a bus south. No forwarding address? Last sighting, gas station security camera near the state line, buying beef jerky and Tony Chashire seasoning, eyes hollow but determined. Erica worried it might end in a meth lab somewhere. Chaos worried it might end in silence. Neither said it out loud. That night, as renovations continued and paperwork stacked like reasonable burdens instead of omens, Clotilde paused in the empty chapel. "Do you think it's over?" Dorothea asked. Clotilde looked at the rafters, now bone-free. "No," she said gently. "But it's ours again." Outside, a bald eagle circled once over the convent grounds before disappearing into the dark. And somewhere far away, Germain stepped off a bus into a town that smelled like river water and unfinished decisions. The ground beneath him felt steady. For now, Chapter 15, Ribbon, Rainwater, and the Girl Who Listens Too Well. The ribbon was red, not blood red, not fire engine red. Just optimistic, small-town ceremony red, the kind you buy in bulk near Christmas wreaths and laminators. The new school for the blind stood freshly painted and faintly smelling of citrus cleaner and possibility, right down the street from the convent call center and bonsai garden, and not far from the malt shop where Erica now worked the counter in a sun cap and apron, sliding milkshakes across chrome with the focus of a surgeon. A modest crowd gathered. Parishioners! Furious looks. A man in Calvarici jeans from the 1980s that refused to die. Someone holding a Dunkin' Donuts box like a peace offering. Chaos stood near the bonsai tables, quietly proud. Dorothea adjusted the microphone. Clotilde stepped forward with ceremonial scissors. "May this place be light where the world is not," she said. She cut the ribbon. Real, warm, unironic applause. Then the students were introduced. 8 of them. 8 small universes walking carefully into a new orbit. A boy with tremors who navigated by tapping rhythm against his thigh. A girl who laughed like wind chimes and memorized bus routes by sound alone. Twins who insisted they could identify anyone by shoe squeak.
A solemn kid who asked if cremation smelled like rainwater or smoke.
And then Halapitanasha, Erica's niece. Soft-spoken! Hair braided neatly beneath a snow cap she refused to remove even in Texas heat. Hands folded. Smile gentle enough to disarm suspicion. She held her white cane like it was an extension of thought. "She's always been special," Erica whispered to Dorothea. "Sweetest kid you'll ever meet." Halapitanasha tilted her head slightly when Chaos passed near her. As if listen, not to footsteps, to something underneath. Inside the school, the tour began. The tactile maps, the braille laminator humming like a patient bee. The refurbished library with thick white carpet, impractical and hopeful. A music room with hand drums and an old upright piano that had survived 3 relocations and 1 minor hellfire incident decades ago. Someone made a joke about a shotgun wedding between education and chaos. Someone else laughed too hard and nearly soiled themselves when a straight razor fell out of a historical barber kit display in the hallway, a relic donated from the abandoned church cleanup. It clattered harmlessly to the floor, but the gasp echoed. Practical joke, Merrick said quickly, though nobody claimed responsibility. Meanwhile, something remarkable happened to Gumbo. Mid-ceremony, mid-speech, mid-life. Tremors stopped. Not subtle. Stop! His hands, once unreliable, stilled like a lake after a storm. He looked at them as if they belonged to someone else. Dorothea, he whispered, voice breaking. Quiet. The doctors had said nerve damage. Stress. 8. possibly irreversible. Yet there he stood steady. The talking kidney stone now kept in a small velvet pouch in the chapel glowed faintly from Dorothea's purse, as if pleased but not surprised.
Chaos watched Gumbo like he was witnessing amputation reversed. For the first time in months, Hope felt structural.
Across the street at the malt shop, Erica clocked out early and walked over to the school, wiping her hands on her apron. She smelled like sugar and fryer oil in summer.
She hugged Halapatinasha tightly.
You okay, baby?
Yes, Auntie, the girl said softly.
And she meant it mostly, because inside Halapatinasha's mind something else was happening.
Something nobody saw!
Not even us!
When she'd first stepped onto campus, she felt it the hum beneath the ground.
It's the old containment echo.
The place where Bones had once amplified emotion.
Even without sight, she sensed architecture differently. Vibrations in the floorboards. Breath in the air. Heartbeat in walls.
And when Chaos walked past her earlier, she hadn't just noticed him.
She had touched something in him. Not physically.
A flicker.
A practical joke, psychic thought transfer so faint he assumed it was indigestion.
But it wasn't.
Halapatinasha could move thoughts. Like sliding a chess piece half a square when no one is looking. She didn't know how. She didn't know what. But when one of the boys tripped near the stairwell, she had nudged an idea into his head. Step left. He did.
He avoided falling down a flight of stairs.
No one noticed, except the smallest face plant in the garden, which turned toward the school and whispered, "Ow!"
By evening, the celebration shifted into gentle chaos. Kids exploring.
Parents chatting. Someone joking about tying villains to train tracks like in old films.
Merrick describing a cable car in San Francisco like it was a mythic beast. Cato planning shuttle logistics for future concerts in the auditorium.
Ralph squawking about someone dangling off a balcony 11 stories up for drama and cardio. Life fell forward.
Rain began.
Sheets of it pouring off the roof, running into gutters, collecting in shallow dips along the white carpet entryway. Halapatinasha stood very still in the doorway. List! She could hear the rainwater hit individual leaves in the bonsai garden. She could hear Erica laughing across the street. She could hear Gumbo's heartbeat steady. And she could hear something else.
A memory beneath the soil. A whisper of past rituals.
The echo of effigies. The hum of unresolved energy. She smiled. So sweet! And somewhere deep inside her, a voice not malicious, not innocent considered what might happen if she pushed harder next time. Just to see. A crosstown bus past the edge of the dunes. Inside it, Jermaine stared out the window, jaw tight, hands shaking again despite everything. On the seat beside him, a small bottle cap. He turned it in his fingers. Heads or tails?
He flipped it. It landed in his palm. And he didn't look. Back at the school, Halapatinasha lifted her chin slightly toward the sky.
The rain stopped mid-drop for half a second.
No one noticed. Except the faceplants. And they did not look pleased. Chapter 16, The Weather Insider. Halapatinasha's days began quietly.
She woke before the others in the dorm wing, hands folded over the quilt like she was listening for instructions from the mattress.
The Louisiana morning air pressed warm and wet against the windows, thick as hope and humidity.
From the hallway came the shuffle of cowboy boots, the soft slap of workout clothes against tile, a faint argument about ranch chips versus barbecue.
She liked the ordinary sounds. They were easier than the deeper ones. In class, she ran her fingers over braille pages while Sister Dorothea explained orientation techniques. One boy with Asperger's syndrome recited bus schedules in perfect cadence like poetry. Another student described Larry Bird and Air Jordans found in the street as if they were relics from a mythic sports cathedral. Someone asked if George C. Scott and Jack Nicholson had similar voices. The debate grew heated and oddly scholarly. Halapitanasha smiled through it all. Helped a girl untangle crimped hair with careful fingers. She passed along hope like it was a physical object. She listened to Amy Grant on the radio in the rec room and tapped her cane against the wall in rhythm. Sweet, unassuming. Erica stopped by after her shift at the malt shop, smelling like ice cream and fryer grease, still wearing her apron. She kissed her niece's forehead and asked if anyone was being mean. No, Auntie, Halapitanasha said gently. Which was true. Most. But Halapitanasha did not experience the world like the others. She felt pressure systems before they formed. Felt humidity gather in the sky like someone taking a deep breath. Felt the way air shifted when someone entered a room angry. She had learned slowly that she could press back. Just one afternoon during Pacino in the common room, she tested it. Just a thought. A nudge. Rain. At first it was a sprinkle against the metal gutters outside. Students laughed. Someone made a joke about Maybelline running in the humidity. A boy in cowboy boots ran outside and whooped. Halapitanasha tilted her chin upward. More? The rain thickened. Not violent. Not dramatic. Louisiana rain doing what Louisiana rain does best. Except it wasn't Louisiana rain. It was hers. Meanwhile, the adults were distracted. Dorothea and Clotilde were arguing in the blue and white living room of the convent about funding grants and a flash drive someone had anonymously left in the chapel donation box. The contents were disturbing financial records, manipulated photos, correspondence hinting at past coercion within the church. Not crimes, not exactly, but ugly enough. The flash drive hummed like a live wire between them. Gumbo, steady now, sat nearby rubbing V05 hair grease into his thinning hair like it was 1978, and he still had somewhere to be. Laughed about constipation remedies and how downward dog position could release trapped gas better than any doctor. Normalcy was fragile but real. Until the first report came in. The parking lot's flooding.
Not a lot.
Just enough to notice. Water pooled near the curb outside the school. Drainage overwhelmed. The ditch along the road filling faster than expected. Clotilde stepped onto the porch and frowned. This storm wasn't forecast. Erica glanced at the sky. It's clear. It's blue. Sun visible. Yet rain hammered down directly over the school grounds. Not beyond the malt shop. Not beyond the bonsai garden. Just here. Halapitanasha stood in the hallway near the white carpet entryway, listening to the water gather. She felt powerful. Not just capable. She remembered her mother's voice once. Sharp and desperate during a mother/son trauma bond conversation that wasn't meant for her ears. She remembered a rabid dog that had to be put down when she was little. She remembered scratch marks on the back door and a nosebleed that wouldn't stop the day her father left. The world had always felt unstable. Now she could stabilize it or disrupt it. A teacher slipped slightly near the doorway. Halapitanasha thought. Stop! The teacher regained balance instantly. The water crept higher along the curb. She thought, more! The ditch overflowed! Inside the school! A janitor shouted that the elevator was malfunctioning, jolting like a crashing elevator scene from an old movie. Students were ushered calmly to higher ground. No just confusion. Chaos stood in the courtyard, rain soaking his shirt, staring at the sky. Something was wrong! The faceplants trembled. One whispered, not natural.
But not dangerous.
Not yet. Inside the hallway, Halipitanasha clenched her jaw slightly. Drowsiness crept over her like the aftertaste of exertion. Power at a cost. The rain intensified one final notch. Water licked at the threshold. Just enough to flood. Just enough to prove she could. Then she released it. The sky cleared instantly. Steam rose off pavement. People blame climate change. Bad drainage. Louisiana being Louisiana. They laughed nervously.
Erica hugged her niece tightly.
You okay, baby? Yes, Auntie. Halipitanasha tilted her head toward the sun. In her mind, she saw the atmosphere like Tinker toys clicking together. Pressure lines, cloud seams, invisible architecture. She could pull it apart. She could make it weak. No one suspected the sweet girl with the cane. But as she walked back inside, rainwater dripping from her hair, a faint trickle of blood slid from her nose. She wiped it away before anyone noticed. And deep beneath the convent soil, something ancient stirred again. Not afraid, curious. Chapter 17, Velvet Aftermath. The flood did not linger. By morning, the water had receded like it had someplace better to be. The parking lot steamed. Mud dried into polite Louisiana cracks. The white carpet inside the school survived with only faint discoloration, which Dorothea declared character. But something had changed. The little face plants along the edge of the convent grounds, normally knee-high and mildly judgmental, were taller. Not dramatic, just enough to make you question your memory. Their leaves felt thicker, almost velvet to the touch. Like some botanical tribute to the velveteen rabbit, the idea that becoming real requires wear and love and maybe a little suffering.
Chaos crouched near them.
One plant blinked. Moisture accelerates awakening, it said in a voice like wind moving through Velcro. Chaos fell backward into the gravel.
2 more plants straightened.
We can speak now, said the second tone academic. The flood fed us, said the third, almost cheerful. Thank you, weather girl. Chaos did not respond immediately. Because if the plants were thanking Halipitanasha, that meant they knew. Inside the school, the mood was buoyant. Students laughed about yesterday's flash flood freakout. Someone had toilet paper wrap the building, overnight streamers of white cascading off the bell tower like a rebellious wedding cake. No one claimed responsibility. The Archie comic book found taped to the front door didn't help narrow suspects. Erica blamed teenagers from the crosstown bus stop. Cato suspected the malt shop night crew. Ralph blamed Velma from Scooby-Doo and her suspiciously tidy moral framework.
Cleanup was oddly joyful.
Velveeta sandwiches were passed around because someone had misread a catering order and bought 3 industrial blocks of cheese product.
Kids played music while peeling toilet paper from tree branches.
Someone hummed Only in My Dreams by Debbie Gibson off-key, but when they tried to sing the lyrics aloud, Dorothea politely shut that down.
Copyright, she said gently.
Meanwhile, the plants were evolving. Chaos gathered Dorothea, Merrick, and Clotilde at the garden.
The three speaking plants stood slightly apart from the others like tiny green diplomats.
You have entered phase 2, said the academic one. What phase? Merrick asked.
Integration, said the cheerful one.
The girl is conduit, said the first.
Clotilde crossed herself reflexively.
Conduit for what? Atmospheric recalibration, the plants replied in eerie unison.
Chaos swallowed.
So she's not possessed?
No, said the second plant.
She is... Amplifier. That word again. Amplifier. The bones had amplified emotion.
Now the flood had amplified the plants, and Halipitanasha amplified the sky.
Later that afternoon, Ralph demanded center stage and delivered a monologue that echoed across the courtyard like glitter sprayed from a historical cannon. Let me tell you about the late 80s, early 90s teen pop renaissance because you people are staring at talking plants like you never survived a cultural monsoon before. Debbie Gibson, Tiffany, New Kids on the Block, they were weather systems. Synthesizers and hairspray and heartbreak in a denim jacket. You think a little rain is chaos? Try a mall tour in 1989 when hormones were the national currency. Those girls could command a crowd like a bullfighter commands a cape swing the microphone, crowd swoons, history written in glitter. And don't get me started on the velvet scrunchies and cassette singles. That was climate control through key change. So if a small human wants to tinker with cumulonimbus like it's a keyboard solo, I say give her a manager and a stage. Applause followed. Mostly because nobody wanted him to keep going. At sunset, Halipitanasha sat alone on the steps behind the school, fingers resting lightly against damp brick. The air felt heavy again. Not storm heavy. She had felt the plants wake. She hadn't meant to help them. But she hadn't minded. A group of older boys in workout clothes passed by joking about Air Jordans found in the street and a comic book stashed behind the gym. One muttered something about Weather Witch under his breath. She tilted her head. The breeze shifted. Sat. The air pressure dipped for just a second. The boys froze. Did you feel that? One whispered. Halipitanasha smiled softly. She imagined velvet curtains closing around the sky. She imagined clouds gathering like a stage crew awaiting cue. Above her, the first dark shape formed. Not rain! Not yet! Just a single cloud spinning slightly against the otherwise clear Louisiana evening. Behind her, the three speaking plants whispered together. Said one.
Observation, said another.
Intervention? Asked the third.
Chaos watched from across the yard, heart pounding.
Halipitanasha lifted her chin toward the spinning cloud. And this time, the wind began to circle.
Chapter 18, The Tightrope Above the Crater. The wind did not become a tornado. It did something worse. Like a tightrope stretched across the convent courtyard, invisible but humming with tension. The spinning cloud above Halipitanasha narrowed, elongated, then held itself in place like a thought refusing to resolve. Chaos stepped forward slowly, like approaching a rabid dog that might also be a saint. Halipitanasha, he said gently. She turned toward his voice, almost curious. I just wanted to see how far it would go. The cloud pulsed. In the bonsai garden, the three speaking plants leaned toward her like disciples awaiting instruction. Across the yard, someone dropped a beer stein they'd brought from home for no reason other than personality. It shattered dramatically. Nobody reacted. All eyes were on the sky. The wind circled once more, then stopped, not dissipated. Like a pause button pressed on weather itself. At that exact moment, something remarkable happened inside Gumbo again. He heard it, not the wind, a frequency. Low. Like someone blowing into a conch shell at the bottom of the Gulf. He pressed his palm to the soil, and he understood. The flood hadn't just awakened the plants. It had unearthed something beneath the convent grounds of forgotten medicinal trench dug in the 1940s during a penicillin shortage. The nuns had once cultivated mold cultures in hidden cellars to treat infections, quietly when hospitals were overcrowded and segregation complicated access to care. The soil was steeped in antibiotic history. Healing lived here. That's what Halipitanasha was amplifying, not destruct. The plants whispered it now. Balance, said one. Too much is greater, said another. Too little is drought, said the third. Above them the cloud began to rotate again. Inside the school cafeteria, someone was still eating hash browns and sipping a chocolate milkshake like this was a rodeo intermission. A trombone clattered off a chair in the music room. Erica, still in her malt shop apron, sprinted across the street yelling Halipitanasha's name like she was chasing a runaway Easter basket. Meanwhile, Ralph climbed onto the chapel railing and began narrating like he was the Lone Ranger of atmospheric instability. We are walking a cosmic tightrope, people. This isn't a crack house weather system, this is advanced emotional meteorology. Someone get me a shovel and a public indecency charge because I'm about to expose the sky. No one knew what that meant. It didn't matter. Halipitanasha felt something shift. For the first time the wind resisted her. The soil beneath her feet felt older than her anger, older than her curiosity. She felt the medicinal hum in the ground penicillin ghosts whispering restraint. Her nose began to bleed again. Thin line. She swayed. Chaos reached her just as the suspended cloud fractured into moonbeam-thin strands, dissolving like a crater on the moon, slowly filling with light. The sky normalized. Sound returned. A couch inside the common room tipped over from the pressure release and startled. A volunteer into spilling hand sanitizer across a stack of diabetic test strips. Normal chaos. Human chaos. Later, after things calmed, Dorothea and Clotilde sat in the courtyard under a sky pretending innocence. She's not evil, Dorothea said. No, Clotilde agreed. There's a difference, and power without guidance becomes a circus without a net. Erica held her niece tightly that evening, whispering reassurance, unaware of the scale of what she was holding. Halipitanasha lay awake later in her dorm bed, fingers brushing the edge of her pillow like tracing a map. She didn't want to hurt anyone. She just didn't want to feel small. Across town, Germain stepped off another bus, this one passing a boarded-up building that used to be a crack house and now sold moon-themed souvenirs and moonbeam postcards. He stared up at the sky and felt a pressure drop that had nothing to do with barometric readings. Back at the convent, the three speaking plants faced one another. Escalation avoided, said the first. For now, said the second. Next phase approaching, said the third. In the distance, faint and metallic, a sound echoed like a conch shell blown across open water, and Halipitanasha smiled in the dark. Just slightly. Chapter 19, Starlight Before the Fall. The week after the suspended storm, the town tried to behave. The school for the blind ran smoothly. Fresh fruit at lunch. Braille encyclopedias unpacked in shelves. Dowel rods stacked neatly in the workshop for mobility training exercises. The white carpet had been replaced with something darker and more realistic. No one mentioned flooding. Normalcy is a log roll across a river you keep moving or you fall in. Halipitanasha kept moving. She attended lessons, practiced cane work, helped a classmate understand constellations by touch, tracing raised star maps under her fingertips. But inside her the atmosphere was tightening. She'd begun to feel things before they happened. Not weather. People. When Erica felt worry, Halipitanasha sensed it like rug burn across her own knees. When chaos wrestled with anger about the past, she tasted it metallic and sharp. The plants hummed louder every day, their leaves angled toward her like tuning forks. You are the bridge, they whispered now. Bridge to what? She asked quietly one afternoon. Correction. Meanwhile, Gumbo's remarkable steadiness deepened. The tremors hadn't returned. He moved through the garden like a man granted a second orbit. He began digging carefully along the old trench lines where the penicillin cultures had once been cultivated. He found something else. A hollow chamber reinforced with brown-stained planks and dowel rods. Inside it, jar, labeled in careful handwriting from decades past. And one more object. A thick encyclopedia volume wrapped in oilcloth. When he opened it, pages had been carved out to hide a small radio transmitter. The convent had once been part of something bigger than charity. During civil unrest in the late 60s and early 70s, it had quietly served as a communication node relaying messages between activists, including members sympathetic to the Black Panthers, when segregation made official channels impossible. Healing and resistance had lived here side by side. The land remembered. On Friday evening, a starlight meteor shower was predicted. A rare one. Town buzzed with excitement. Blankets laid out near the school courtyard. Someone joked about tea time with the universe. Erica brought thermoses of happy tea from the malt shop. Chaos strung small lights around the bonsai trees. Germain returned without warning. He walked up the shell road looking lost as a goose in a parking lot. But steadier somehow. He carried nothing but a small backpack and eyes that had seen something he wasn't ready to name. "Thought I'd come home," he said simply. Nobody asked for details.
Not yet.
As night fell, the sky opened. Streak after streak of white fire tore across the dark. Laughter rose. A little boy counted meteors aloud like multiplication tables. Halapetanasha stood very still. She could feel the upper atmosphere flexing.
Like muscle.
The plants trembled. "This is convergence," they said.
Armageddon.
Chaos whispered, half-choked. No, the plants replied. Then it happened. A meteor brighter than the rest flared and split. Not in the distance, directly above them. The air pressure dropped hard. Windows rattled. Someone screamed. Halapetanasha's heart slammed in her chest. She didn't mean to. She truly didn't. She reached upward with her
and pulled. The streaking fragment slowed.
Just slightly. Enough to alter trajectory. The object detonated miles away over empty wetlands instead of town. A distant explosion bloomed against the horizon. Shockwave rolled across them like thunder on a delay. No damage. No casualties. Just silence and ringing ears. Halapetanasha staggered, collapsing to her knees. Blood ran freely from her nose now. Erica rushed to her. Chaos stared at the sky, stunned. The plants bowed toward her. "Confirmed," they whispered. Ralph, who had been silent for once, launched into a full-throated monologue that cracked through the stunned quiet like a rifle report. "Annie Oakley could shoot the ash off a cigar at 50 paces, and you people are surprised a girl can nudge a rock out of the sky. That woman stood in a dusty arena and made men rewrite their expectations. Courage ain't polite.
IT ain't small. It's aim and steady hands when the crowd is betting against you."
Annie didn't wait for permission from history. She made history blink first. So if we're standing under stars that want to fall, maybe we need to stand like Annie, feet planted, eyes open, and not flinching when the world calls IT impossible. The students didn't fully understand.
But they felt.
Later that night, after everyone dispersed and emergency news reports confirmed the meteor explosion caused no damage beyond a scorched marshland, Halapetanasha lay awake again. This time she was afraid. Not of what she could do, of what might notice. Because when she pulled that meteor fragment, something pulled back. Far beyond atmosphere, beyond starlight, beyond anything rooted in Louisiana soil. Something had felt her, and it was adjusting course. Chapter 20. The circus came back to town the same night the barn burned. Nobody had planned it that way. The fire just found its moment. Flames climbed the old wood like they'd been waiting years for permission. The sky turned the color of a bruised peach, and ash drifted down soft as winter. Cato stood nearest the heat, face lit gold and grief-struck. Sean kept pacing, running a hand through his hair like he could comb order back into chaos. Brisbee steady, stubborn Brisbee held the bucket line together even when the well coughed up mud. Chaos, true to name, watched the blaze like it was an oracle speaking in smoke. The circus tents went up in the adjacent field as if nothing were wrong. Red and white stripes against a black horizon. A calliope wheezed out something cheerful and obscene in its optimism. Life insisting on spectacle while something sacred turned to cinders. Ralph arrived late in a borrowed Range Rover, tires spitting gravel. He stepped out carrying a paper sack that smelled like Thai food and smoke. Peanut sauce leaked through the bottom, dripping onto the dirt. He stared at the barn like he was looking at a confession booth. "This is what happens," he said quietly, "when we pretend we're not Siamese twins." Nobody answered. He meant them. All of them. Bound at the hip by history, by lies, by that night in the dungeon of bad decisions when blackmail had slithered in like a snake. The blackmail literal envelopes of threat, literal words typed in cold ink had been the first tremor. The public indecency charge had been the second. The rest had been aftershocks. Annie stood apart from the group, hands wrapped around herself. She had once joked about being force-fed peanuts by fate, allergic to the very thing she craved. Now she looked like someone walking the stations of the cross, step by step through consequences she never asked for but couldn't deny. Sean moved toward her. "We can still fix this." "No," Annie said. "We can finish it." The circus ringmaster, sensing an audience, cracked a whip in the distance. A spotlight swung wide and caught the smoke plume. For a second the burning bond looked like part of the act. Fire as choreography. Tragedy as ticketed event. Cato stepped forward, voice shaking but clear. The letters were forged. The blackmail was Chaos's idea, but it was my hand that delivered them. I thought I was protecting us. Chaos didn't flinch. Protection is just control wearing a nicer suit. Brisbane turned on him. "You lit this." "No," Chaos said, nodding toward the barn. That was lightning. Smoldering in the beams. "You just didn't smell it. Truth is ugly like that. It waits in dry timber." Ralph dropped the sack of Thai food. Container split open in the dirt noodles, peanut sauce, rice. He laughed once sharp. "We built this whole thing like a circus act. Tightrope friendships. Peanut butter promises sticking our mouths shut. We thought we could juggle secrets forever." He walked toward the flames until the heat pushed him back. "We are Siamese twins," he said again, louder. "What one of us does, the other bleeds from."
Annie stepped beside him.
"Then let's separate." It wasn't literal. It was braver than that. Sean pulled a folded stack of papers from his jacket, the last of the blackmail letters, the threats, the lies. He held them out to Chaos. "End it," Sean said. Chaos stared at the pages. For once, no philosophy. Just a man confronted with the architecture of his own sabotage. He took the letters and walked to the fire. For a breathless second it felt theatrical, like the circus had scripted it. But when he tossed the papers into the flames, the sound wasn't dramatic. It was small.
Paper catch. Ink curling.
Lies turning to... The barn groaned. A final beam collapsed inward, sending sparks up into the night. The crowd from the circus had gone quiet. Even Spectacle knows when to bow its head. Brisbane exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for months. Cato sank to his knees, not in defeat, but in release. Sean wrapped an arm around Annie. Ralph stood still, watching the fire burn down to something manageable. "Hanukkah starts with a single light," Annie said softly. "This is the opposite. We started with a blaze and forgot the oil." Ralph almost smiled. "Then we learned to measure flame." Sirens wailed in the distance, late but coming. The circus lights dimmed one by one, as if conceding that some dramas don't need an audience. By the time the firefighters arrived, the barn was a skeleton. Charred beams like ribs against the sky. Smoke drifting upward, no longer furious, just tired. They stood together in the cooling dark.
Not fixed.
Not innocent. Not entirely healed. But honest. The dungeon doors were open now. The blackmail burned. The circus packing up. The Range Rover idling quietly like a reminder that escape is always available but rarely the answer. They would rebuild something.
Not a barn.
Not the old version of themselves. Something less flammable. The night settled in around them, heavy and thoughtful. In the distance, a lone spotlight from the departing circus swept once across the field, then went dark. Resolution is never clean. It's a scar, not a reset. A brooding line across the skin of memory. And still into the smoke, under the ache, there was a faint, stubborn scent of peanut sauce and ash and possibility. The fire had taken what it wanted. What remained was choice. Chapter 21, The Moose, the Mind, and the Marriage License. If the barn burning had been an ending, it was the kind that leaves embers under the floorboards. So Chapter 21 did not begin with fire. It began with cake samples. Cato and Sean sat at the long folding table in the convent's blue and white living room, debating buttercream like theologians parsing scripture. Wedding magazines were stacked beside a petty cash box labeled "Florals Do Not Touch." Rose bushes outside the window trembled in a mild wind that was, for once, meteorologically innocent. "I don't want a circus theme," Sean said firmly. No circus, Cato agreed. But maybe understated spectacle. They were planning something simple. Honest. No smoke machines. Just vows and food and maybe a trombone if the music room behaved itself. Ralph flipped through a catalog of tuxedos like he was reading Carl Sandburg aloud, solemn, Midwestern, unexpectedly tender. Marriage, he declared, is not the Autobahn. You don't floor it and hope your cojones keep up. It's more Mark Twain rafting down the river. You steer. You correct. You occasionally hit a sandbar and pretend it was scenic. Sean rolled his eyes but smiled. Hope had returned in a quieter form. Across town, Chaos was the one who ran into the sticky situation.
Literally?
He had been helping inventory decorations in the small local museum, a faded building with caves painted on the hallway walls and slot machines from a long-defunct riverboat exhibit. The museum's newest installation was a commentary on humans and animals and other objects, a kind of philosophical mashup featuring action figures glued into dioramas depicting evolutionary absurdity. Someone likely teenagers, possibly petty thieves, had broken in the night before and tried to pry open a glass case containing a rare silver spoon from an 1800s river captain. In the process, they'd knocked over a bucket of industrial adhesive used for mounting displays.
Chaos stepped back into it.
Then the other. Then the hem of his trousers. He stood frozen, glued to the museum floor beneath the looming presence of the taxidermy moose. The moose had been there since 1954. Its plaque read, Harold, a crossbreed legend of the northern woods. Chaos stared up at Harold. Well, he muttered, this is dumb. The museum curator had stepped out for coffee. Chaos's phone lay on the counter out of reach. The adhesive was setting fast, creeping like a ritual in which species are consumed human, swallowed by glue, pride swallowed by circumstance. He exhaled slowly.
And then
the moose blinked, not dramatically, just once. Mortality, Harold said in a voice like wind in caves, is the original adhesive. Chaos froze for an entirely different reason. You're not real. None of you are particularly convincing, the moose replied. The museum lights flickered. Help, Chaos said flatly. Harold tilted his antlered head. You are stuck because you struggle against small humiliations, the moose observed. You survive massacre-level emotional detonations. Yet glue unmakes you. Chaos considered this. Don't lecture me about monstrosity. The moose's glass eyes seemed to gleam. You mistake spectacle for magnitude. You fear public hanging of reputation more than quiet integrity. You play mind games and call it strategy. The adhesive crept higher up Chaos's calves. Fine, Chaos snapped. What's the solution? Urine, Harold said calmly. Chaos stared upward in disbelief. Historically, the moose continued, urine breaks down certain adhesives. Also, humility does the same. Chaos blinked. There are moments in life where dignity becomes optional. This was one. He did what needed doing. It was not glamorous. It was not heroic. But slowly, very slowly, the adhesive softened. When the curator returned, Chaos was seated on the floor beside a potted plant, trousers stained, shoes ruined, staring up at the moose like he'd just negotiated with God and lost on technicality.
You okay?
Define okay, Chaos muttered. Harold resumed being taxidermy. Back at the convent, wedding planning continued. Dorothea suggested a reading from Mark Twain. Clotilde suggested restraint. Ralph suggested fireworks and a Carol Burnett impersonator descending from the rafters. No massacre, Sean insisted. No public hangings, Cato added dryly. They laughed. He felt earned. Germain arrived carrying a blank check figuratively and literally. He'd settled something out of court from the old public indecency charge mess.
no blackmail.
No threats. Just closure. Use it for the school, he said simply. Halipit and Asha stood nearby, quiet as ever. She had not manipulated the weather in weeks. The sky had remained obediently mundane. She instead listened to crosstalk between grown-ups, to coughing from the kitchen, to the soft hum of the rose bushes outside brushing against brick. She felt something new. Not power. Balance. The plants in the courtyard had stopped whispering of escalation. They hummed now like a low engine at idle. That night, as everyone gathered under simple string lights, Sean squeezed Cato's hand. We survived ourselves, Sean. For now, Cato replied. The world beyond them still held autobahns and slot machines and petty theft and silver paint on unfinished canvases. It held caves and dandelions pushing through cracks. It held poodles and moose and crossbreeds of fear and love. It held mortality. They chose something steadier. No spectacle, no glue. Just vows being drafted carefully in pencil. And somewhere in the museum, beneath fluorescent light, Harold the Moose stood silent again, guardian of absurdity, witness to humility. The world is always a little berserk. The trick is not to join it blindly. The trick is to stay, plant your feet, and choose who you become before the adhesive sets. Chapter 22, The Red Carpeted Staircase. Two things had never quite made sense. First, the transmitter hidden in the encyclopedia carved into the soil beneath the convent while the land itself hummed like it remembered voices. Second, why Halapetanash's power felt less like invention and more like inheritance. Both threads tightened the night the mirror spoke. It happened in the old blue and white living room, under a ceiling fan that wobbled like it was contemplating retirement. Chaos had been staring at his reflection BO5 hair gel, slicking his stubborn bangs into submission, trying to look like a man who understood rocket science instead of a man who once glued himself to a museum floor. The mirror flickered. Flashbulbs popped not physically, but in sensation. The room brightened like a red carpet premiere. And then
she appeared.
Sister Supreme. Latino drag queen angel. Snakeskin boots. Rosary beads looped around lacquered fingers.
Sassafras voice like sylph dragged across a brick wall.
She stood in the mirror beside Scott, who appeared not as a reflection, but as a presence faint, luminous, like a time traveler who missed his stop and decided to stay. Baby, Sister Supreme said, adjusting an imaginary crown, you are not haunted. You are linked. Scott's voice did not move air.
It moved thought.
The transmitter wasn't for politics alone, he said telepathically to Chaos. It was atmospheric. Early weather modification experiments. Cloud seeding. Frequency testing. The convent was chosen because of the soil composition cotton gin residue. Mineral deposits, certain molds cultivated during penicillin shortages. It created a conductive field. Chaos felt the pieces slide together.
Yes, Sister Supreme purred.
Allegations were made decades ago about secret projects. Nothing proved. Promises buried. But the land remembers frequencies the way rosary beads remember prayer. Scott's presence sharpened. Halapetanasha isn't generating power. She's resonating with an old grid. The flood activated dormant pathways. The meteor pulled broadcaster signal outward. The room hummed. Outside, the little face plants trembled in unison.
They knew.
They just weren't saying. Dorothea entered with a tray of tomato soup and donuts like this was any other evening. She froze mid-step. Are we having a visitation? She sighed, or do I need lap band surgery for hallucinations? Sister Supreme winked. Honey, if hysterectomy-level pain couldn't stop you, a little celestial crosstalk won't either. Chaos rubbed his temples. So what's coming? The mirror darkened briefly. Scott's voice dropped low inside his mind. A weather correction event, larger than before. The grid is destabilizing. Something astonishing will manifest unless balance is restored.
How large? Chaos asked.
Sister Supreme smiled slowly. Big Bird in a Camaro doing gangster rap on a red-carpeted staircase large. Chaos blinked.
I need scale, not metaphor.
Fine, she snapped.
Mind-boggling.
Outside, Cato and Sean were reviewing wedding seating charts while arguing over whether cotton candy had any place near olive oil appetizers. Bills for the residential cleaning service fluttered across the table. Erica stood nearby opening cat food for the convent strays, muttering about sloppiness and rubber bands snapping at the worst times. Germain rolled a bowling ball-sized paperweight back and forth across the courtyard bench like he was calculating fate. The sky was calm. Too calm. Halapetanasha stood barefoot on the grass. She felt it now, the grid humming louder. The old transmitter buried under the garden thrumming like a cricket in her skull. The faceplants angled toward her, leaves tight, withholding. What are you telling me? She whispered. They rustled. In the mirror, Sister Supreme's expression shifted from serious to solemn. You don't fix this with power, she said. You fix it with consent, Scott added silently. The grid needs a grounding event, a willing act of surrender. not control. Chaos exhaled, like turning off a time machine before it tears the century apart. Exactly, Sister Supreme said. You want serendipity, not Hunger Games. The first tremor rolled through the ground like distant thunder. Rose bushes shivered. A bowling ball toppled off a table and cracked against stone. The convent lights flickered. Somewhere inside, a rolling pin clattered to the floor. The sky above Louisiana twisted, not dark, not stormy, but spiraling. Clouds rotating in opposing directions, like two minds arguing. Halipi Tanasha felt the pull. It wasn't hers alone anymore. The grid wanted amplification. Amplification would mean spectacle. Spectacle would mean destruction. She stepped forward onto the courtyard's red brick, heart racing. Cato and Sean ran to her. Chaos emerged from the living room, Sister Supreme's image fading behind him, but her voice echoing faintly. Choose love over control, she called. Even if it bruises your ego, sugar. Scott's presence lingered one last second in Chaos's mind, grounded through connection. Halipidanesha reached out, not to the sky.
To Erica.
To Chaos. To Sean. To Jermaine.
Hands linked.
Like rosary beads. Like humans refusing to split into Siamese fear. The hum intensified. Cotton balls from a craft basket lifted into the air, spinning like miniature clouds. Rubber bands snapped off tables. Cat food cans rattled. The old transmitter underground vibrated hard enough to crack its casing. The faceplants finally spoke. Now, they whispered. Halipidanesha closed her eyes.
She let go.
The sky convulsed once. A spiraling column of air formed above the courtyard, tight, luminous, almost robotic in symmetry. It collapsed inward.
Not explode.
Implosion. A silent, astonishing compression of force that folded the weather back into itself like a blanket being shaken out. The clouds flattened. The grid went quiet. The transmitter below ground shorted out with a final sigh. Stillness. No massacre. No spectacle. Just breathe, returning. The mirror in the living room cleared. Sister Supreme stood alone one last moment. You did good, she said softly. Then she was gone. Later, under a calm Louisiana night scented faintly of sassafras and olive oil and something newly possible, they sat together in the courtyard. Wedding plans resumed. Tomato soup reheated. Donuts shared. The faceplants stood smaller now. The grid was dormant, but not dead. Halipidanesha looked up at the stars and felt something unfamiliar. Not hunger.
Not dominance.
And somewhere deep beneath the convent soil and cracked wood and abandoned frequencies, a warning still lingered. Weather always returns. The question is whether you meet it with control or connection.
Chapter 23, The Eye of the Girl. The first sign was small. Halipidanesha stood near the rose bushes behind the school, holding a rose gold cell phone case someone had dropped in the courtyard. She turned it over in her hands like it was a mirror she didn't quite trust. The sky above her was pale and harmless. He'd been watching her for weeks now, not like a jailer, not like a hero. More like someone who had once mistaken cleverness for wisdom and didn't want to repeat the error. "You'll feel it again," he said. She tilted her head. Phil, he studied her face. The innocence was there, but beneath it calculation. You don't accidentally control weather, Chaos said gently. You test it. She smiled. A child smiled. Then she let the rose gold case slip from her fingers. A cloud gathered directly overhead. Coincidence, she would later claim. Plead the Fifth Amendment of meteorology. Chaos felt the grid stir, though it had supposedly gone dormant. The land hummed like it was remembering something it shouldn't. She shrugged. By noon, the National Weather Service had issued advisories. By afternoon, meteorologists were using phrases like record-breaking anomaly. Not hurricane season, a rotating mass off the Gulf intensifying at impossible speed. Catfish docks boarded up. Someone mentioned Pleasure Island in Port Arthur, Texas, directly in the potential path. Chaos stood in the courtyard, staring at the sky as it bruised purple. You didn't mean for it to grow, he said. Halapitanasha stood very still. That was... Across town, Cato and Sean were securing wedding decorations as wind whipped through the yard like a hula hoop gone feral. Meatballs from the reception trial tasting rolled off a table and into gravel. Erica herded students into safe rooms, voice calm but strained. Orphans from a neighboring shelter were being transferred inland. The special education transport buses lined up in a frantic procession. The little face plants had gone silent. The sky churned harder. On the news, anchors compared the developing cyclone to historic disasters in North Carolina campgrounds and coastal towns flattened overnight. The word endangered was thrown around like confetti species, homes, lives. Chaos grabbed Halapitanasha by the shoulders. She met his eyes. There it was. But curiosity without empathy. You like seeing what happens, he said quietly. Her voice dropped to a whisper. The wind roared. Windows shattered somewhere down the street. Sirens wailed. This was no longer this was escalation. Chaos felt something crack open inside him, not anger, not fear. He had once manipulated people the way she manipulated precious systems. Now he saw it from the outside. A torture chamber doesn't have to be physical. It can be control disguised as curiosity. He stepped back. Her expression flickered offense, then challenge. He closed his eyes, not for the sky. He had always been sensitive to the grid. He had always dismissed it as metaphor. Now he dove into it. The wind screamed. The cyclone offshore tightened into a terrifying spiral. Chaos pushed against the frequency not to overpower it, but to dampen it, like grabbing a spinning boat motor before it tears itself free. Pain lanced through him. Rug burn across his palms, though he touched nothing. Bone-deep vibration like boot camp drills pounding through his spine. Halapitanasha's eyes widened. You're in... Yes. And she was gone. One moment standing before him. The cyclone stuttered, lost coherence. Its eye collapsed in on itself like a punctured lung. The spiral unraveled into violent but ordinary storm band. But survivable. Emergency broadcast shifted from catastrophic to cautionary. Damage reports trickled in. Flooded street. A fishing dock splintered. No drive-by chaos, no massacre-level devastation. The town breathed. Chaos dropped to his knees in the mud. Halapitanasha was nowhere. Search parties formed before the rain even stopped. The rose gold phone case lay abandoned near the rose bushes. Cato stood beside Sean, soaked, stunned. Sean asked. Chaos stared at the dark horizon. She didn't run, he said quietly. He looked toward the museum district, toward the spaces between pressure and intention. She found the next. Thunder rolled one final time, distant now. The little face plants trembled not in fear, in recognition, and somewhere beyond the visible atmosphere, something shifted in response. Chapter 24, Cold Reality. Germain had always walked like he was balancing on something invisible, more like a jogging trail that curved just enough to keep you from seeing what was ahead. The night he relapsed, the air in Port Arthur was thick with leftover parade glitter from an early St. Patrick's Day celebration that had marched loud and green through Cajun culture and brass bands and beer foam. The parade route still smelled faintly of fried dough and spilled whiskey. Germain told himself he was just taking a walk. Past the Catholics, past the smoke shop glowing neon at the corner, past the cracked window panes of the old hardware store where a Lamborghini magenta flyer for some luxury car raffle fluttered in the wind like an insult. He told himself he wasn't thinking about Halipit and Asher vanishing into thin air. He wasn't thinking about feeling useless when Chaos had grabbed the storm with bare hands. He wasn't thinking about Charles. Charles was the kind of friend who could sit still in pandemonium and make it look like strategy. Charles, who once said, "You either bravely step out on the ledge or you spend your life frantically calculating how not to." Germaine had never known which one he was. It looked tired, the kind of place with a false wall hiding a secret safe room that everyone knew about but pretended was clever. The kind of place where a horse saddle leaned against a peeling door for no reason except someone once had one. Germaine hadn't been back in months. He stood outside, seriously wondering. He could still turn around. Cold reality whispered that sobriety had not made him heroic. It had just made him exposed. He went in. Addiction is not glamorous. It is not cinematic. It is small decisions stacking up like unpaid bills. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself he deserved relief. He told himself the cyclone hadn't needed him anyway. By 1 a.m., pandemonium in his bloodstream. By 2 a.m., his heart was no longer negotiating. He collapsed on the stained carpet beneath a faded poster of sapphires and Caribbean beaches. The others in the room scattered. Victim mentality is contagious in places like that. Everyone thinks they are the exception until someone stops breathing. How Charles knew to look there is unclear. Maybe the kind of friendship that survives stupidity. Germaine lay pale and slack, foam at the corner of his mouth. "Not like this," Charles muttered. He slapped Germaine's face lightly. Cold reality does not pause for reflection. Charles dragged him outside into the damp night air. Dialed for help. Shut. An ambulance siren wailed down streets still dusted with green beads. At the hospital, fluorescent lights erased all romance from bad decisions. Chaos arrived first, then Cato and Sean. Erica stood in the hallway clutching her rosary beads, whispering prayers not for forgiveness but for oxygen. Respiratory suppression. You got him here in time. Amputation had been mentioned in another room down the hall for someone else. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and thin chances. Germaine survived the night. Meanwhile, the sky over Port Arthur did something strange. Just a faint tremor in the clouds, like someone hanging off an 11-story balcony and deciding whether to climb back in. The little face plants at the convent leaned toward the Gulf. Halipit and Asher was not gone in the simple sense. She was displaced, as if she had stepped through a false wall in the atmosphere into a safe room of weather itself. The grid had not quieted. It was reconfiguring, and Germaine's collapse had rippled through it, because grief, like crack things and entitlement and regret, sends frequency outward. He felt like something had been amputated, not a limb, but an illusion. Chaos sat beside him. "You almost died," Chaos said simply. Germaine swallowed. "No speeches," Chaos added. Germaine managed a weak breath of a laugh. "I don't want one." Silence settled between them. Then Germaine said quietly, "I kept thinking I was owed something. Like survival was a blank check." Chaos nodded. "Fiery entitlement burns faster than barns." Germaine stared at the ceiling. Chaos stiffened. "You felt it too." But the little face plants back at the convent rustled in warning. Something was aligning, something more surgical, and somewhere beyond the visible sky, Halipit and Asher was learning the cost of stepping fully into the storm. The next move would not be hers alone, and this time it would demand more than curiosity. Chapter 25 Sight. The first crack in the illusion was small. Halipit and Asher flinched at light. It happened in the chapel when incense smoke curled towards stained glass and sunlight shifted across the floor. Her eyes tracked it. Chaos, not because he was looking for it, because he wasn't. He felt the truth land in him like a briefcase dropped on a coffee table, heavy, deliberate, impossible to ignore. Later that afternoon in the blue and white living room, Dorothea was flipping through a melancholy coffee table book about the Holy Land when Cato cleared his throat. Ralph fluttered to the curtain rod like he'd been rehearsing for Broadway. Sean stood behind Cato, steady as scaffolding. "Everyone sit down," Cato announced, theatrical as ever. Dorothea narrowed her eyes. "If this is about spilled wine on the teacher's manual again." "It's not," Sean said gently. Chaos stood off to the side, hands in pockets, looking like a teenager who had just discovered the word consequence in a dictionary under a microscope. Cato lifted an imaginary curtain. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we have two revelations. One astonishing..." Ralph puffed his chest. "Drum roll without drums." Halipitanasha stood in the doorway. She looked different because she was no longer pretending. Her gaze moved deliberately across the room. She saw Dorothea's rosary beads. She saw the cracked corner of the coffee table. She saw the blackberry bush outside brushing the window pane. She was not blind. Silence detonated softly. Dorothea stood up so abruptly the book slid to the floor. "You can see," she said flatly. Halipitanasha didn't nod. She met her eyes. Gumbo inhaled slowly from his chair, absorbing it like a man tasting strong coffee. "He already..." Dorothea's voice sharpened. "From the beginning..." Halipitanasha hesitated. Not entirely," she said. "It wasn't cruel. It was strategy. She had learned early that special education programs came with shelter, reduced expectation, space to observe, a catch-22 of protection and invisibility." Dorothea's face flushed. "You built this entire identity on a lie." Then Cato raised a hand. Ralph tilted his head ominously. "Number 2, he croaked. Chaos finally looked up. Halipitanasha reached down and placed a hand flat against her stomach. It was subtle, but unmistakable. Silence again, this time heavy. "And yes," she added carefully, "Chaos is still in high school. I know how it sounds." Dorothea stared at Chaos like she might reach for a pocket knife just to cut through the moment. "You got that girl from the blind school pregnant," she snapped. "Her name," Chaos said quietly, "is Halipitanasha, and she's Erica's niece." The words landed like a cop car door slamming. "This is a scandal," she hissed. "We run a Catholic school. We have a reputation. We cannot be the next cautionary tale on some Christian rap gossip blog." His voice was not loud, but it... "Some reckless..." Dorothea shook her head. "This is beyond reckless. It's reality," Gumbo said. The rift began right there, visible as a crack through polished wood. Chaos felt like he was standing at the North Pole of his own life. He wasn't triumphant. He wasn't proud. He was... "I won't disappear," he said. "I won't hide behind an ultimatum or some secret safe room. I won't pretend this is a spell book I can just rewrite. You think love erases responsibility? It defines it." Halipitanasha watched him carefully. She had manipulated storms, but this was weather of a different scale. Cato stepped forward again, seizing the moment like a stage cue. "And now," he said grandly, "our final announcement." Sean squeezed his hand. Ralph puffed up so dramatically he nearly toppled off the rod. "Ladies and gentlemen," the parrot shrieked, "return of the prodigal diva. I am returning to Christian contemporary music." Dorothea blinked. "I've been writing again," Cato continued. Through spilled wine and incense and cat shit in the alley behind the old crack house. I have something to say." Sean stepped beside him. "And I'm behind him all the way." Ralph flapped back. "Rastafarian Christian rap collab possible." Cato smiled softly. "High school father-to-be. Holy Land incense still hanging in the air." It was messy. It was deeply human. She sank back into her chair, rosary beads clutched tight. "This is not what I prayed for." Gumbo reached over and placed a hand on hers. "Prayers are not contracts," he said gently. Halipitanasha felt the child inside her like a quiet pulse, neither weapon nor miracle. Melancholy settled like dust, but beneath it something stubborn persisted. And for the first time since she had ever touched the sky, Halipitanasha wasn't reaching upward. She was looking forward. Chapter 26, The Withering. The face plants began to curl at the edges 3 days after the wedding was moved up. It started subtly, stems bending inward like old men reconsidering a boast. Halipitanasha noticed. "They're going," she said softly. Gumbo stood beside her in the courtyard. hands clasped behind his back like a farmer inspecting a field in the Oregon woodlands. He had seen crops fail before. He recognized the quiet dignity of decline. "They've said what they needed to say," he murmured. That evening, as the sky settled into a bruised violet, the plants did something they had never done before. They spoke all at once. They were impulsive, almost flamboyant. The high collars and Lego mutton sleeves, men in straw hats and serious mustaches, women cinched into corsets like promises pulled too tight, button boots clicking across wooden sidewalks, razor burns from straight blades in barber shops with spinning red stripes, lace, black olives on fancy plates, beefcake lithographs hidden inside steamer trunks. The courtyard fell silent except for their fervor. The Statue of Liberty standing new and green and unashamed. Prairie dogs popping up beside railroad ties. Cakewalks and platoons in orange sashes. Lobster claws at coastal banquets. A corner on the rice market in the 4 food groups yet to be invented. Ralph blinked from his perch. We remember humiliation and degradation dressed as etiquette. Sign language in theater seats when speech was forbidden. Farmhouse floors scrubbed with lime. We remember fashion as armor and fashion as mock ritual. Effigies burned in clearings in the woods, abandoned shirts on fences, promises and allegations trading places like a cuckoo clock. The air smelled faintly of incense and black olives and something like old cotton balls stored too long in a drawer. We remember, they whispered now, fading, that everything withers. Even what believes IT is hiding in plain sight. Their stems sagged. Silence returned. Fell. The knock at the door came just after dawn. Flashlight beams still clipped to their belts, though morning had already claimed the sky. A cop car idled at the curb, VIN number half scratched by years of heat. In Germaine passed during the night, one officer said gently. The word hit like a meat cleaver through bone. Gumbo staggered back. Dorothea pressed a hand to her mouth. Halapitanasha closed her eyes. Germaine, who had walked the jogging trail between redemption and relapse, who had survived the cyclone, who had laughed about red-eye flights and concert shuttles, and once dangled off a balcony 33 stories up in a stupid dare that ended in applause, was gone. No, just a hospital bed and the quiet betrayal of a body that had fought too long. Animal grief. He was a boy, Gumbo said hoarsely, even when he pretended to be a man. Years ago, before vows and microphones and reconciliation, she and Germaine had crossed a line, an affair born of loneliness and arrogance. It had ended badly. It had left no clearing in the woods to talk it through. Sean stepped beside her. "I'm here," he said simply. Dorothea looked up, eyes rapt. Especially, she inhaled deeply. Christian contemporary music isn't about pretending, Cato said. It's about dragging your mess to the altar and refusing to let it rot in a shallow grave. Ralph puffed his feathers. Cato almost laughed through tears. No. Smaller than planned. No cakewalk reception. No elaborate red carpet. Just a modest room, folding chairs instead of theater seats. A simple cake with black olives conspicuously absent. Someone joked it was a shotgun wedding for entirely different reasons. Sean wore a clean white shirt, sleeves rolled. Cato carried no bouquet, just a feather pillow tucked under her arm as a ridiculous nod to comfort in chaos. Ralph recited something half Plato, half Archie comics. Halapitanasha stood quietly in the back, one hand resting over her abdomen, aware of the fragility of ectopic pregnancy statistics, teratoma anomalies, all the biological what-ifs that haunt even the strongest intentions. Dorothea watched, rosary beads wrapped tight around her knuckles. Gumbo held himself together with visible effort. Only when Cato and Sean exchanged vows, there was no grand flourish. In hunger and in humiliation, Sean replied softly. In allegation and in promise, they kissed gently. Later that night, after most had gone home, Chaos stepped into the courtyard alone. The soil where the faceplants had stood was dark and still. He crouched and pressed his hand to it. No grid. No whisper about 1890 sleeves or prairie dogs. He thought of Germaine. of someone once dangling from a balcony and laughing at gravity. Mortality had claimed its... No dramatic VI number chase, just biology and time. Inside, a cuckoo clock struck midnight. Halipitanasha joined him quietly. They're gone, she said. Is that the end? Chaos looked up at the sky. No, it's the end of the part where we thought something else was running the story. She slipped her hand into his. Family dispute, children asking hard questions, coffee table books gathering dust, broken objects and repaired ones. But there would also be music. And grief carried without spectacle. The farmhouse across the road flicked off its last light. Port Arthur exhaled. No sirens wailed. Just the steady, unremarkable breathing of a town that had seen monstrosity, seen love, seen depravity, and chosen imperfectly to continue. The night deepened, and the story at last rested not triumphant, not shattered.